Yep.
Okay, major co-host anyways.
Yeah, let me see. Pedro, I will share, right?
Yeah. Share your screen.
Okay, let me see. Where is it? Just a sec. No. Okay, this one. Let me prepare it. Fechar isso. Now, yeah. Okay. So, prepared this presentation with Pedro about this paper, Capitalist Space of Reasons, Analytic Neo-Hegelian Marxism, by this guy, Justin Evans. I wasn't aware of this person until this paper emerged. Thiago's. As you see, my collaboration with Pedro immediately yields an upgrade of the aesthetics of my presentations, which are usually very shitty. So this is much more nice, much nicer than my customary ones. Pedro, please interrupt me anytime, right? Because we're sharing.
Yeah, sure. Of course. We'll go for it.
To add something. Okay, so the capital and the space of reasons. This was a title, obvious title we chose. So also, this is. I think it's important to stress. This is an opportunity also to introduce a few themes that are quite have been quite important to me in the last few years, and we didn't have the opportunity to go about them. Particularly this whole philosophy of Pittsburgh Hegelianism and all of this is something that I've been engaged in for quite a while now, and I was glad to read this paper, since it was a very timely paper for us that could weave this set of concerns that I have with the set of concerns that the group have regarding Marxism and economics and all of that. So this was fortunate. Nevertheless, both me and Pedro, we have our own issues with the paper. So you'll see about that in a minute. Let's go. Are you reading the slide well? Are you seeing it? Okay.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay. So these are the introductory remarks. The point of presenting this paper is to approach some of the issues entangled with Pittsburgh neo-Hegelianism. We are used to call Pittsburgh neo-Hegelians, of course, because it stems from a group of philosophers that taught or are teaching currently in the University of Pittsburgh. Taught because Sellers is already dead, but he was there for quite a while in Pittsburgh. And then the other two that are mentioned in Evans' paper are Robert Brandom and John McDowell, though they are all based in Pittsburgh. So this is why we used to call them like the Pittsburgh neo-Hegelians or something like that, or Pittsburgh Hegelianism. Right? Even Zizek has this critique of Pittsburgh Hegelianism as being not Hegelianism. So it's a common usage, right? So with Pittsburgh neo-Hegelianism, as it may or may not relate to Marxist themes. So the issue is interesting from a historical philosophical point of view, since, as Evans himself mentions, the relationship between the three terms, Marxism, Hegelianism, and analytic philosophy are convoluted. The first sustained engagements of analytic philosophy with Marxism under the guise of so-called analytic Marxism were carried out under the condition of dropping the Hegelian influence on Marxist thinking. So here he mentions, of course, Cohen. I think he only mentions Cohen, actually, maybe Elster at some point. And yeah, it's kind of the canonical, maybe the most well-known engagement within the analytic tradition with Marxism. And if you read, what was it? One of Cohen's books that Gabriel sent me a while back, he even starts the book saying that non-dialectical Marxism is no bullshit Marxism. So it's quite weird to have like a quite different way of relating, you know, this tradition of analytic philosophy to Marxism, but by way of going through Hegel, which is quite a different thing, right? And what it is also what makes this particular milieu, this particular kind of analytic philosophy quite insular, quite different, right? It's not really mainstream analytic philosophy. This is something I've been discussing with a lot of people, like about the bridging the divide and whether there is a divide or not, this kind of discussions. And the analytic Hegelianism sector, I think it's the most well equipped to cross over this divide. In fact, and it does not correspond to, you know, mainstream analytic philosophy as you may get from, for instance, post-Scriptian metaphysics and this kind of thing. So it's quite this Hegelian influence is quite makes it for quite a specific kind of philosophy. Okay, just a sec, somebody. Yeah, chat is just greetings. Okay, so Evans' paper is interesting precisely in the sense that it is putting forward a new possible form of engagement of analytic philosophy from Marxism, this time mediated through the resurgence of interest in Hegelian thought in the aftermath of Wilfrid Sellars' influence. While not agreeing with Evans' final construal of his relationship, this presentation uses his approach as a launching platform for other different kinds of approaches, such as Ray Brassier's that try to weave Marx and Pittsburgh Hegelianism. Both me and Pedro, we feel that some of Brassier's texts are much more nuanced than the Evans one. So even if they share this background, this framework of Pittsburgh Hegelianism, and trying to think over how this could relate to the Marxist framework, Brassier connects this slightly differently than the way Evans does it. Like when Evans says capital is a kind of space of reasons, we've both me and Pedro, we find this affirmation a little far-fetched in a sense. Like the fact is that there are certain components of, you know, our understanding of capital that might warrant some comparison, but full identification of capital as a space of reasons, even an impoverished one, I think it's a bit far-fetched. So we will be arguing a little bit against it by the end of the presentation.
And I just wanted to add that I think Ray's texts are sort of also a bridge to connect this text and sort of, you know, the Sellarsian picture of language use to some of the stuff that we already talked about, I think, and I think that this is kind of why it sort of ends up as being related to this text.
What do you mean, better language use, like we discussed in the group, or just me and you?
No. Yeah, what we discussed and the sort of like the Sellarsian, the space of reasons stuff.
Yeah, and this is also, I think we have to add that our presentation here is like I don't want to brag about it, but our presentation here is much more fine-grained than what Evans presents in his paper, right? So we really tried to pinpoint the critical points of, you know, Pittsburgh Hegelianism much in more detail than you can get from Evans's paper, which is fine because, you know, it's a paper and he has like a limit of limited space to work with. So this is the issue. And the Marxist bit, we can simply, most of it presuppose a certain understanding by by this specific audience, right? So
actually, like just a quick comment. I don't know if the text is not like really successful in the end because of a lack of space. Like I somehow feel like I was just thinking about this just before we started. It's like there's some stuff that like he doesn't seem to take into consideration at all. You know, like I don't know, like there's some especially in the conclusion. Like it's really strange, but we'll get to it when we get to
yeah,
it. But I thought it was quite strange.
I think I know what you're aiming at. Yes, get to that. So Marx and Hegel, he starts his paper like giving this taxonomy of possible relationships between Marx and Hegel that secondary literature have offered. So literature on Marx's relation to Hegel is as vast as the literature on Marx himself. Philosophers, critical theorists, social scientists, historians, and revolutionaries have all had something to say on the matter. But the argument can be seen as having a few central possible positions. I don't really have the feeling that this is exhaustive, but nevertheless, one, that Marx rejected Hegelianism. Two, that he fell back behind Hegel, which seems to introduce a different kind of criterion, right? But nevertheless. Three, that his work mapped onto Hegel's, like there is some kind of identification between one and the other. And four, that he transcended Hegel in positive ways. So either Marx is not Hegelian, or either Marx is behind Hegel, Hegel is better than Marx, or his work mapped onto Hegel's, or he's better than Hegel. So the issue I have with this taxonomy is that his work might as well be mapped onto Hegel's, and even with that, he can transcend Hegel, or either fall back behind Hegel. So I think these positions are not really exclusive, right? So, and he suggests a few authors to each position: Althusser and Coletti, the ones who might prefer to think of Marx as not a Hegelian. He suggests Gillian Rose and Charles Taylor to their second one, which was fell back behind Hegel. And there are two different kinds of third position, the uncharitable readings and the charitable ones. Like those are the names he suggests. And the fourth one, like Marx transcended Hegel in positive ways, he's suggesting himself fall into the fourth one. So this is what he says. This is the approach that I will take below. I will apply a very charitable reading of Hegel to Marx's thought. The charitable reading of Hegel is that of the Pittsburgh School of thinkers and those Hegel scholars who are in conversation with them. Unlike most of those thinkers, I also read Marx charitably. Using the tools of the Pittsburgh School gives us a philosophically interesting understanding of Marx's relationship to Hegel, and more importantly, of Marx's work itself. Sorry.
Now, the funny thing I just realized from what you said is that I didn't think of this when I read the text, but if he's saying that he takes the position that Marx actually adds to Hegel, and his Hegelianism is the Pittsburgh Hegelianism, he should be saying that Marx goes beyond Pittsburgh Hegelianism as well.
Yeah, it's quite weird in a sense.
But he doesn't say any. He doesn't make any critique.
No, actually, the text is a bit crude in that respect. Like, I think it's a bit crude. As I already announced, I think it's a bit crude to identify capital and the space of reasons. And I think it's connected to what you just said, in a sense. Like, he's not really making a critique of Pittsburgh Hegelianism. He's just trying to extract from it this concept of space of reasons, and it does so quite cursorily. But it suits well our ends, which is just to introduce some of these ideas to our research group, right? But yeah, I think it's a result of not taking really a critical stance, either towards Marx and either toward the Pittsburgh version of Hegelianism, which ends up adding weirdly, like in this like post-Pittsburghian Marx, which is quite strange
yeah, you don't really get a feel for what that would mean, right, from the text.
Yeah,
you get a Pittsburgh Marx, perhaps, but
yeah, like post-Pittsburgh Marx, like something like that. Yeah, well, so he's introducing then the central figures in the passage two. Wilfrid Sellars, Robert Brandon, John McDowell can perhaps be best understood as trying to show us what it means to be a rational creature. Rationality is clearly tied to reasoning, and this leads to the long-standing philosophical problem of knowledge. What justifies us in our claim to know that, say, gin is a colorless beverage? The most straightforward response is to point to some gin and thus confirm our claim. The hope is that the thing we point to can found our claim to knowledge without needing any further justification. So this raises what Sellars calls the myth of the given. Sellars lists possible candidates for the given: sense contents, material objects, universals, propositions, real connections, first principles, even givenness itself, and charges that much traditional Western philosophy includes some form of a myth. In each case, philosophers seek some fact that, one, will be independent of any other cognitive state, but which will also, two, provide justification for other cognitive states. So is very, very, it's a very, very summary, very, very cursory presentation of what constitutes the myth of the given. So we will be adding to that. The main issue for Sellars is that, like he says in the, he's referring to certain long-standing doctrines within analytic philosophy, like what justifies us to claim that gin is a colorless beverage. The most straightforward response is to point to some gin. So here he's referring to, for instance, certain forms of logical empiricism that you get from in the beginning of the 20th century that were trying to construct a logical system out of immediate experiential content. So this you have like different versions of this, like with Schlick and with Carnap and all that. Even though I'm reading Carnap at the moment, and I don't think really, what we call the fofoca about Carnap, the gossip about Carnap, is justified. I think he's much, much more interesting than that. But there is like this reading that was mainly put forward by A.J. Ayer, right? The British philosopher, that portrays, for instance, logical positivism, which was one of the first important schools of thought within analytic philosophy in the 20th century, as trying to construct like a foundationalist building, like as a foundationalist picture of knowledge out of these immediate experiencing. So this is what it means, like to point at something and say, oh, this is a colorless beverage. Like there is an immediacy to this experience that because it is immediate, it is also self-authenticating. This is Sellers's own parlance. It is immediate, so you can't doubt it, and then it's self-authenticating, and then you can build other mediations out of that which is immediate. So this was the thing that Sellars was criticizing, actually. So just to be clear, I'm just presenting something that is Sellars' main enemy, right? So he's like, this is the most, I would say, the most well-known form of a given in the tradition that Sellars is dealing with, which is phenomenalism, basically. This phenomenalist picture that, immediate appearances have the attraction to be a foundation for knowledge. And the problem Sellars has with it then, and Evans is pointing at this in this very, very quick quote, is that how then something that is not that does not presuppose any other cognitive state will provide justification for other cognitive states. So I don't think this is the best construal of this problem, but let me see. No, this is too much text that I put there. But okay, I think where is the triads, Sellars and triad, inconsistent triad. This is very famous. I think this is much clearer, right? So there is this three different propositions, right? So the first one says S, which is a certain subject, senses red sense content. Red sense content X entails S non-inferentially believes or knows that X is red. So what is it? What does it say? It says that sensing something entails believing or knowing non-inferentially that something has the property, right? So this is the first proposition. The second says the ability to sense contents is unacquired. So it's a kind of an innate ability, right? And the C says the capacity to have classificatory beliefs of the form X is F is acquired. So the problem with this kind of philosophies of the given, according to Sellers, is that they want to produce a kind of mongrel, right? That you have something that is immediate and something that is also justificatory. So this inconsistent triad is constructed in a way to show that, well, something that is immediate cannot be the justification for other things. So he said, it all hinges upon the continuity between sensing and knowing. If it is possible to sense facts, then sensible contents have propositional form, and we are capturing a given. So sustaining A and B implies negating C. Sustaining B and C implies negating A. Sustaining A and C implies negating B. This is why it's an inconsistent triad. So if you believe A and B, so you can have a sense datum, and this entails a knowledge, and you sustain that the ability to sense is unacquired. So this entails non-C. So the capacity to have classificatory beliefs is acquired. It cannot be acquired. So this is the problem. So either you have like justificatory traction of an immediate sense content, and then your classificatory beliefs are also unacquired. So this is the problem. Or either you're sustaining B and C, like you have the ability to sense contents is unacquired, and the capacity to have classificatory beliefs of the form X is acquired. Then the first, the antecedent does not follow. And sustaining A and C implies negating B. So you have either you have the entailment between sensing and non-inferentially knowing, and the classificatory and the acquired nature of the classificatory beliefs, and then you can't have really sensing, which is unacquired. So this is the inconsistent triad. And Sellers has a choice. He chooses within this inconsistent triad. He drops. Basically, he drops A, like, and he retains B and C. Just a second. Sorry. Where is just not? Just a second. Sorry. Sananda was talking, so I was kind of distracted. This is the basic. This is the most, I'd say, the most robust way of construing the kind of labyrinth wherein you get certain options, and the given basically.
Sorry, JP. This is Reza. Just for me to make sure that I'm following, I didn't get a chance to read the paper. For me to follow this, if I wanted to compare it with critique of pure reason, is for Kant, all these three are unacquired.
I would say for Kant, all these three are unacquired. I would say the ability, I would say B follows for Kant, like the ability to sense contents is unacquired. So Sellers is a Kantian. Sellers is a Kantian in a sense. The problem with Kant is that there is a sense to which everything is unacquired, right? This is the main issue. Like the categories of understanding are also unacquired. So
yeah, so
senses,
sensibility, which has to do with the faculty of intuition, is unacquired.
Yes, you're right.
So B kind of follows from A, or sorry, the ability to sense or having the faculty of intuition is number B, right?
Yeah. Yes, like having the faculty as an unacquired
is
ability.
Unacquired,
Yes,
right?
it's B. Yes, you're right.
And then B and C are the main things. I mean, A seems to be the conclusion of B and C. So
no, it's actually inconsistent according to Sellers. You can't have A if you accept B and C, and you can't have C if you accept A and B. And you
so that's what I'm trying to say. That for Sellers, Kant is inconsistent.
Because in a sense, he is. Yeah.
Yeah. So for Kant, C is also unacquired, because we have the pure reason. Pure reason has the schemas that can arrange sense input into certain schemas and then submit those schemas to the power of determination, to categories.
I think you're saying that Kant accepts A and B, but he can't accept C. So this is a different solution from the Salesian one, right?
Okay. Because I mean, there is not parallel. You're saying. I mean, I now realize it.
Yeah.
So actually, this is not a critique of Kant. It's
no. I think there is a critique of Kant, but it's not that. Like he's not saying that Kant upholds the three propositions, right?
Okay.
The problem is that in order to have C, you have either to drop A and B, right? So Sellers wants to keep C. The capacity to have classificatory beliefs is acquired because he's coming from a certain picture of language wherein you build the capacities to classify things, to categorize in the language, right? It's not something that is out there in your mind or in the content picture. Like even if it presupposes some kind of innate abilities, right? But this is a job for neuroscience and other kinds of knowledge to take care of. So he wants to have C. He wants to have C. But to have C, you can't really uphold the picture of the given, the most typical picture of the given, which is A. A is the most, I would say, the most typical idea of the given, that seeing something is already non-inferentially believing that such and such, right?
So whom does he impute the myth of the given to?
Lots of different people, even though many of them are not named by name, but C.I. Lewis is one, and Kant falls prey to the myth of the given in a certain sense. I'd say it's a very, very general accusation. Like almost everybody falls prey to the myth of the given in a certain sense. I would say even Sellers himself falls prey to the myth of the given. But this is a whole different issue. It has to do with my own take on this. But what Sellers wants is to uphold C. And in order to uphold C, you can't have A and B. And A and B, the conjunction of A and B is the most typical form of the given. So this is the basic gist of it. And this, I was just jumping ahead just because Evan says this, right? Something that will be independent of any other cognitive state, but will also provide justification for other cognitive states. So how does this have traction in a sense? If provided that the cognitive state is a justificatory state, in a sense, you have to, it must have a justificatory relationship to other states. Like you believe something when you are able to justify what you believe. This is the basic picture that this Pittsburgh Hegelianism is trying to put forward of knowledge, right? So knowledge is not immediate contact. You don't have, even if immediate contact might enter into knowledge, but it's not sufficient to have knowledge, just to have immediate contact with some sort of content. This is the basic gist of it. So Salles is famous for upholding two potentially contradictory theses: semantic holism and scientific realism. The contradictory character is not apparent from the beginning, but shall become manifest by reading the canonical texts on each as selected by Brandon. So here's a quote by Brandon. Brandon wrote his book about Salles from empiricism to expressivism. He does a great job at organizing these, which actually produced like this division in the philosophical scene between right Salesians and left Salesians. This has nothing to do with politics. It's just a joke with Hegel, like right Hegelians, left, even if in the case of Hegel it was about politics. But here it's about upholding one of those two commitments, right? Either the semantic holism or the scientific realism. So the problem is, if you are criticizing the given, how are you upholding scientific realism, which has to do with the fact that you are upholding the reality of the reference of scientific discourse? Like, for instance, atoms. You think that atoms are real. You think that quarks are real. This kind of thing, right? So there is a certain, you have to uphold the reality of the referent of certain discourses. At the same time, you have semantic holism. So with the semantic holism, the tip of the balance is on the other side. Like every concept has its own determinacy, not by the direct relationship it has with the outside, the thing out there, out of language, like in the direct reference picture, right? But with the justificatory relations it might have with other concepts. So what I was just saying about this idea of knowledge as having this justificatory nature is a very grand and general idea for Salles. Like every concept will be characterized by having certain relationships of entailment with other concepts, and this is in the order of explanation. This comes first, then the direct reference picture. So you have like this kind of seemingly contradictory thesis, right? Upholding the two at the same time. And this is why this, in a sense, produced two different schools, so to speak: the left Salesians that will uphold semantic holism, and the right Salesians that will uphold scientific realism. So basically, this is what happened. So this is a quote. Several decades ago, Richard Rorty suggested the philosophical admirers of Wilfrid Salles could be divided into two schools, defined by which of two famous passages from his masterwork, Empiricism and the Philosophy of Mind, are taken to express his most important insight. Like it's a decision, like you have to decide if it is one or the other. But Salles himself was trying to weave both into a consistent whole. So this is a difficulty. So the first one is: in the dimension of describing and explaining the world, science is the measure of all things, of what is that it is, of what is not that it is not. So this was famous. This became famous as the Ciencia Mensura maxim. Like science will be the measure of all things. This is also both quotes are in the same text, Empiricism and the Philosophy of Mind. So the second one is: in characterizing an episode or a state as that of knowing, we are not giving an empirical description of that episode or state. We are placing it in the logical space of reasons, of justifying and being able to justify what one says. So if you, you can either choose the first or the second one. If you choose the first, you are left Salarysan. You will develop the communitarian view. You are right Salarysan. You will develop this scientific realist view. For instance, Daniel Dennett is a typical example of a right Salesian, Ruth Millikan, several other philosophers, many in the philosophy of mind, actually. I think maybe the most radical and most interesting ones are the Churchlands, like the eliminativist philosophers of mind, right? What the Churchland, this duality that Sellers is putting forward is well developed in another paper, which is called Philosophy and the Scientific Image of Man, right? And it concerns the fact that the justificatory relations that obtain between pieces of knowledge are not straightforwardly reducible to causal relations observed in science. This problem was made explicit as a cooperation and conflict, or / conflict, between the two images of man in the world, what Sellers called the manifest image and the scientific image. So this is the thing. For Sellers then was connecting each one of these ideas to a different image. And his objective was to arrive at a stereoscopic view of man in the world, what he calls man in the world. So the manifest image is this image that sees man as a rational being, able to justify his beliefs and able to account for the actions of others and all of that. And this for him is a very sophisticated framework, explanatory framework. Actually, we take it as a kind of immediacy, in a sense, like a commonsensical thing. But for Sellers, this is already the result of a historical elaboration. When you arrive at a certain understanding of man as rational animal and member of a community of speakers and thinkers and all that. So this is a typical image, this typical idea that characterizes the manifest image. The scientific image, on the other side, is this concurrent idea that is being constructed out of the resources of the manifest image. Because, in the manifest image, you have a bunch of different ways to go about knowledge, right? And there is the story that Sellers tells us is that there is a certain point wherein we started postulating entities. So in order to explain the behavior of certain molar entities, we are postulating like molecular entities or a certain different entities in order to understand the behavior of that which is phenomenally available. For instance, you have a certain theory of the gas, the behavior of gases that is correlating pressure and volume, for instance, which is mainly in the manifest image because there is no much postulating of entities going on. And then you have the molecular view, like gases are like swarms of little things that we don't have visual access to. Of course, we eventually have visual access to, but in the moment somebody comes up with this idea, it's a postulation of a certain of entities that are supposed to explain the behavior, what is available in the manifest image. So this seems like an idle thing, like innocent thing. But the problem in this paper, Philosophy and the Scientific Image of Man, is the fact that once you uphold the reality of the scientific image, there's nowhere to be found intentionality, rationality, all the things that were able to construct the scientific image itself are not there. So this is the clash of both images. So you have like this purely causal picture, in a sense, which is the scientific image, and this rational normative one, which is the manifest image. So you can map roughly the normative side to the manifest image and the causal side to the scientific image, even though the scientific image historically, it is in a sense getting rid of certain elements of the manifest image, even if it was brought about by the rational resources that are present in the manifest image itself. So Sellers' project was to build this
sorry, JP, this is Reza. I just had a question. I don't know if that is a fair comparison, but can we compare Bachelardian epistemology to left Sellersians?
Not sure what you mean, in what sense. I'm not that familiar. I used to read Bachelor at some point, but it's been a few years, so I'm not, don't really remember what is it about that is able to be compared to left Sellarsians. You mean, just to be clear, you mean left Sellarsians are the social ones, and right Sellarsians are the scientific ones. You mean like Bachelard is, I think Bachelard is much more close to the right Sellarsians, right?
So maybe this is not for me to fair. It's not fair to say the entire Bachelor epistemology, but Badiou condenses a certain type of epistemology. He refers to French epistemology.
Yeah.
And he says that the French epistemology is basically the one that looks into having an accurate picture of the reality, not by completely adhering to reality, but by abstracting from reality.
I see. Yeah.
And that abstraction is what creates scientific theories. So as a matter of fact, in order to be scientific, you have to bracket certain aspects of the reality in order to, for example, come up with the theory of quarks or atoms or things like that. That sounds like a manifest model.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It is possible. I think there are relations to be drawn between them. Even though I'm not sure Sellers would say that what defines scientific reasoning is abstraction, because in the manifest image itself, abstraction was already at place. Like he's contrasting. There is a third thing that people usually don't mention, which he calls the originary image, which is basically animism. Like there is an originary image, or there was, wherein we usually think of things as acting in character. Acting in character is like attributing to everything a certain kind of personality, so to speak. And this has a certain explanatory purchase, right? And the manifest image comes about when you actually already make a difference there. Like you are only some things act in character, while other things don't. So you have like this first division between, I'll say, I don't know, maybe the human or the animal and the other kingdoms. That is characteristic of the manifest image. And then there's the scientific image comes with I'm not sure if it's so much about abstraction. What Sellers says, which is, I admit I find a bit weird, is that the difference is of the postulating of certain entities, right? So there's a kind of postulational science. So this is very within the tradition of analytic philosophy of science, in a sense, because there is the debate between, scientific realists and instrumentalists. So instrumentalists are people that say, oh, this all this talk about quarks and stuff like that, they are helping us to make predictions, but they are not really about what constitutes the furniture of the world, so to speak. And Sellers is trying to have a cake and eat it too, in a sense. Like he wants to have all the holistic, almost coherentist picture of knowledge, while having the reality of the reference of a certain sector of theory making, which is specifically scientific theory making, which is postulational, and not so much as abstractive, but at the same time, this postulating of entities can be read as being motivated by a certain kind of abstraction, in a sense, right? Because you might want to have certain comportments, behaviors that are found in what we are able to see, and this might be in turn be motivated by a certain abstraction of what could it be that is responsible for such behavior, in a sense. So I think it's a different picture, but there is something to it. Like there is something to it regarding I see what you mean regarding the primacy of experience in this subjective experiential sense or not. So Sellers is a critic of that, in a sense. So in French epistemology, once we get like to Althusser, which is very influenced also by the same tradition, you have this whole opposition, right, between what purports what is the domain of subjective individual experience, which is ideological, and that which is structural, therefore scientific. So you have a kind of duality that can be maybe partially mapped onto each other, but at the same time, I think the justifications are different because the traditions are in a sense different. The ontological issue of the reality of scientific entities in the Austrian tradition was very important, and irenic instrumentalism was a very important doctrine at the time, the doctrine of Reichenbach, Hempel, these kind of thinkers, right? In a sense, I've been talking a lot. I don't know, Pedro wants to add something at this point. Sorry. Pedro?
No, keep going.
Keep going. Okay.
I'll intervene when I feel I should.
Okay. Even if you want to correct something that was inaccurate that I said, it's good. Okay. It's difficult to be 100% accurate while just talking like this. So the first passage asserts the primacy of the scientific procedures on matter of ontology, which means to the ontological question, what is there? As Quine puts it, the answer must be informed by positive science. This is the ciência mensura, right? In the dimension of describing, science is a measure of all things. So the second...
I have a question at this point, though. Do you think it's very Hegelian to give this role to science?
No, I don't think so, but Sellers is not Hegelian.
Okay, I think we're not there yet. Okay, there's still a step towards Hegelianizing all of this.
Yeah. I think the Hegelianism comes in with the left-Salarsins, in a sense. Sellers is still a Kantian. This is very Kantian, because there's I think this might help. You have these two propositions, right? One is about stuff that is out there that we can't see, in a sense, like postulated entities of positive science, like physics as the paradigm. The other one is like about, let us say, categories of understanding and phenomenology.
Yeah, it really maps nicely onto being an event and then logics of world. The science of what is and what is not.
I want to have this conversation. Please come in.
I'll store that for future.
Yeah. But just let me finish this one, because you're asking about Hegel. I think this is Kantian, and Brandon thinks this is Kantian, but with a twist. The thing is, in Kant you have this. I mean, of course, this is a very big debate whether You have the two-world interpretation or the two aspects interpretation, right? Like noumenon and phenomenon, they are the same world, but they are two aspects. One is the world as considered from the point of view of the transcendental subject. The other one is the world in itself. Or you have this two-world interpretation, which kind of gives a bigger importance to the gap between these two dimensions, right? In Sellers, it's pretty obvious that, you know, the manifest image maps onto phenomena and the scientific image maps onto noumena. But the thing is, Sellers is very clear about this, because noumena for him, is a Kantian up to the point that noumenon cannot be this absolutely unattainable dimension. He says noumenon can be attained by positive science, by postulational science, and progressively, I would say that unconceals, to use the Heideggerian turn of phrase, like, and this is a kind of a recipe that Sellers comes up with that is connecting Kant and Peirce. Peirce has this idea of a regulative ideal of finished science, right? This finished science is not something that we will be there and we'll know everything, but it's a regulative ideal. We must, in a sense, uphold this regulative ideal in order to have this abductive process of reasoning that yields different scientific results and scientific progress, in a sense. So Sellers is kind of mapping the noumenon to these kind of results of these abductive reasonings, right? That are Peircean. So it is still upholding a distinction between the manifest and the scientific, or the subjective and, in a sense, the objective. So it's very Kantian in a sense. There's a gap there in a sense, even if this gap is dynamized, like you can uncover things from the nominal dimension. The picture is mainly Kantian, right? And the Hegelianism comes in with Brandom and McDowell, actually. So just the quick answer was no. I don't think this is Hegelian. But what is Hegelian in a sense is the semantic holism. But it is a specific sense of Hegelian, of course. Like it's Hegelian under a certain description of what Hegel is proposing, right? Which will end up being the Pittsburghian description.
Okay, no, but
yeah. So yeah, I see what you mean about being an event and logics of roles, but yeah.
Yeah, we can leave it for.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, The second gives an epistemological thesis on what constitutes knowledge. And knowledge here is not direct contact with any entity, but it is the positioning of a piece of language, say a declarative sentence, in a web wherein in such declarative sentence yields consequence that in turn will compose the sentence's meaning itself, in a sense, to be further exposed. So it is both, what is interesting, it is both a thesis about knowledge, an epistemological thesis. Like, when do you say that you have knowledge of something? It's when you have the experience of this something, or is it when you are able to say more stuff about this something? So, in a sense, to be crude, what Sellers is choosing the second option. It's not a matter of contact. It's a matter of saying further things about that thing. Like, and you have, in order to say further things about that thing, you have to conceptualize it in a sense that, you know, it will be defined in terms of other things. So this amounts to say what he says, what he said before, that knowledge is not a direct contact with something, but it is the placing of something in a web in a justificatory web. And this is why you can say further things about the things that you know, in a sense. So then you have a further problem, right? A problem that will be dealt with by all his students, the people that were influenced by him. That is the relationship between that which with which you have direct contact and the justificatory web. So this is also what John McDowell says in the end of this slide, like the contradiction alluded and best articulated by Sellers in his paper Philosophy on the Scientific Image of Man concerns the fact that the justificatory relations we obtain between pieces of knowledge are not straightforwardly reducible to causal relations observed in science. This problem was made explicit as a cooperation and conflict between the two images of man in the world, what Sellers called the manifest image and the scientific image. In Evans's paper, he refers to a further philosophical problem that stems from this same difficulty and is expressed in John McDowell's philosophy as the conflict between the given and coherentism. This is kind of almost pretty intuitive. Like if what is justifying, if what is justifying the knowledge you have is the relationship of this piece of knowledge or of this piece of language, let us say, or this piece of thought with other thoughts, what is the relationship between these webs and its nodes and the reference, the outside reference, right? So John McDowell is then criticizing now, it's like an internal critique of a certain way. The Salesian picture is, well, you have then a tension between coherentism and the given. Like, I would say it's better than the given is to say between coherentism and referentialism and reference, in a sense. So how does the coherentist picture has reference, a real reference, in a sense? And this was Sellers' project, in a sense. So, and well, I just said that Sellers' critique of the myth of the given can be seen as a means to compatibilize the scientific realist thesis that the entities to which the scientific theory is referred to are real, with the idea that concepts are determined within a web of commitments that will be called the space of reasons. So here you have the inconsistent triad we talked about. So there you go. And then the version, John McDowell's version, coherentism and the given. But if one cannot have an individual concept without having more than that individual concept, then a concept cannot fulfill one of the conditions of a given. No concept can be independent of other cognitive states because all concepts necessarily rely on other concepts. This suggests that if there is to be a given, it must be non-conceptual. So instead of the concept of gene, we might try to found knowledge on the immediate visual appearance of the colorless liquid. But this given would fail to fulfill the other condition of the given, that it justify further cognitive states. So I think this is pretty clear. Sorry, whoa, what's happened? Yeah. This is because Sellers and those who follow him take rationality, judgments, inferences, concept usage to be normative and not just causal. Although the light bouncing off the tumbler will cause certain effects on my retina, and they in turn will cause neurochemical effects and so on, none of these causal effects suffices to produce thought. Thought is not merely causal. That is not what Brandon calls a reliable differential response disposition. For this reason, Sellers claims the attempt to analyze statements about knowledge into statements about non-epistemic facts is a radical mistake. Let me see just if there is more to this. Yeah, but just to flesh out a little bit, this reliable differential response disposition is the idea that even if you don't have thought or knowledge, you might classify in a certain sense, in a certain primitive sense, the environment. So this is actually Brandon's vocabulary, reliable differential response disposition, RDRDs, to be short. So random usually makes the cut between, you know, pure sentience and sapience with the aid of this idea. Like, I'm always criticizing this because I find this kind of funny. Like he usually comes up with the idea of a parrot. Like a parrot, you can train a parrot to yell the word red when it sees something red. Okay, so this is an RDRD. Like, it has a reliable response that is differential, because if you show a blue patch of tissue, it won't yell red. It will yell red only if you show a red piece of tissue, because you trained it to do so. And it is a disposition, because you can predict that it will respond in that way. So this is an RDRD. The RDRD are not only exclusive to animals, like he says, like a thermostat does an RDRD. Some metal that rusts in contact with, you know, salt water. This is an RDRD in a sense. Like, it is classifying the environment for us, for the rational being that can see it. We can infer from that RDRD something about the environment, but the RDRD is just a response, like a brute response. So the thing with the parrot is also to show that knowledge is not just reaction to a differential reaction. Like, you can train a parrot to say, I don't even know if you can do that, but anyway, you can train a parrot to say red in the presence of red things. But what's the difference between the parrot that says red and some human that says this is red? The human has the concept of red in as much as it can say what it entails, what a concept entails. When you use red, you can say it is colored. You can say it is not blue. You can say it is not yellow. You can say it is similar to pink in a sense. So there you have it. Like, this is the concept of these guys in a sense. To have a concept means to have this. Have the whole. Not. This is very subtle, but okay. It means to have at least a patch of concepts, a certain web of concepts that are responsible for the determinacy of the concept you are using. So concepts are differentially related to other concepts. This is Hegelian in a sense, and this is already in Sellers, right? So the difference between the parrot and the human is that the parrot doesn't have it. The parrot doesn't know that red is colored and the red is not blue, even if the performances are correct. It says red and it says maybe blue if you train it to see blue and say blue, but they don't know what follows. This is a cut, right?
Hey, can I ask a quick question along these lines? Epistemic here at the bottom, that's referring to like being within the space of reasons, yeah? Yes. Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, this is basically it. Yeah. And this is that there are very radical consequences to this in a sense. Like, for instance, the problem of acquiring concepts. Sellers says something very weird, that you cannot acquire one concept. So for an hypothesis of, you know, the emergence of language, this is quite radical, right? But because you can't really have a language that is constituted piecemeal, piece by piece, like this. In order to have one concept, you must have at least some other concepts. This is not to say that language is a whole, or language emerges out of the blue complete, because it's never complete as well. This is very important to this kind of inferentialist picture of Pittsburgh Hegelianism. But nevertheless, you must have a few concepts that are responsible to the determinacy of one another, right? This is very important. And there is also another component to this picture, which I find very striking, very interesting, is that if concepts are, there is this double-sided, it is a double-sided account in a sense, because if concepts are constituted by their relationships to other concepts, when you use a concept, you are automatically committed to the consequences of the concept. You can make an error, of course, but if you always make an error, you will be like the parrot. Like you cannot be counted as somebody that is using the concept. So to me, this is a resistant error. What do you say? How do I call that? Error tolerant. This is an error tolerant account of concept use. But if you always make an error, you're not using the concept. So, which means if you use a concept, you are committed to at least some of the consequences of the concept. So then you have, just with this phrase, you have like this double-sided thing. Like you have these alectic modalities on the side of objects, like concepts are then articulated by material incompatibilities between things, like blue is not red and red is not green. So you have material incompatibilities between concepts that are constituting the determinacy of these concepts. And you have, from the side of the one that is using the concept, you have what Brandon, this is more Brandomian, but it is there in a sense in germ, in cell, it's in a initial form. On the side of the user, you have what he calls a deontic normative modality. So if you are committed to use such concept, you are committed to the consequences of the concept. You are committed to the truth of something that is green is something colored, for instance. Or if that is a cat, that is a mammal. And if that is a mammal, that is an animal. So you are committed to a bunch of, let us say, declarative sentences that are true or taken to be true, right? So this is on the side of the subject or the user, you have this normative deontic modality and attitudes, right? So there you get like you start to get a more robust, let us say Hegelian, but to say that we'll have to in a sense there are critiques to this in a sense of being properly Hegelian. Of course, Zizek does not agree with this account, but you start to have in the Pittsburgh perspective a kind of Hegelian picture where it's not only the objects, concepts are not only responsive to objects, but our uses are also structured by the commitments that we are undertaking just by using a concept. And this is not voluntaristic in a sense, like it's not up to you. You are using red, either you are using correctly or not in a sense, but at the same time, there is this further very interesting consequence that is, you don't know everything that follows from a concept. And this is crucial. This is also, I think, a Hegelian insight. Like, in order to use a concept, how am I compatibilizing these things? Like, on one side, you are committed to a certain determinacy, to a certain set of consequences when you use a concept. This is one proposition. At the same time, you don't know everything that follows from the concept you use. So this is what Brandon calls the ampliatory task of concept use. Like, if you are using a concept and you have to know certain entailments that are responsible to the determination of the concept, but you don't know everything. So you have the task of searching for these entailments, right? And you don't know everything that a concept entails, even individually or as a community. Like, this also connects to the idea of science, right? Science is discovering new properties about certain objects. These new properties will take the form then as certain lateral commitments when you use the concept of the thing that is being tested, right? So this face-off between language, the resources of language and knowledge is built in this picture. Like knowledge goes hand in hand with the development of the resources of the language that is expressing the knowledge in a sense, right? So this is the basic picture of inferentialism. Right?
But this last thing that you said, I think it's sort of crucial in reading the text, right? Like in the sense that there is a sort of like not wanting to jump the gun, but just to sort of like highlight how important this is that like towards the end there's a sort of like, well, maybe capitalism is a impoverished space of reasons, but then like there's this sort of like inbuilt, which is like I think that there's like very different ways of going about this, but like that there's this inbuilt like computational impossibility of tracking everything that any of our claims commit us to, right? Like that there's this sort of like and this is what I think this is where I think that Evans really gets it wrong, right? Like that there cannot be the expectation that one or the collectivity of the agents is able to track what their commitments entail. And I think that in this bit there's something like quite crucial to sort of like, I don't know, like synchronizing, let's say, like Salarzian picture of a concept and like a theory of capitalism.
I think the synchronization, I think you agree with me because we discussed this before, but I think the synchronization is possible in a sense, not synchronization, but the relationship is possible. Like, and it might be fruitful. I think Ray has some very interesting insights into that, but the synchronization in the sense of having a mapping one-to-one or something like that between, you know, a capital as described within the Marxist framework, because this is what this is about, right? There is a certain descriptive framework, which is Marxism, and Evans is proposing that the Marxist framework amounts to a space of reasons, even if it is an impoverished one. But there is and you, Pedro, you are talking about this very important element that is the amplificatory task that is built in the space of reasons that might be absent perhaps from the picture, the Marxian picture. But at the same time, there is another kind of unknown that is in the Marxian picture that is, I mean, I'd say more crucial even, that the Marxian picture usually is cast as a genealogical critique, you know, of certain pictures of capital. So there are certain pictures of capital as stemming from the behavior of individual rational agents that are thought of as ideological, right? So it seems that the Marxian picture needs, in a sense, in order to, from the point of view of the space of reasons, to be, in a sense, unconscious. So it doesn't amount to a space of reasons in the same sense as the literal space of reasons of concept use you are talking. Like, of course, there is an unconscious dimension of concept use in the sense that Brandon, for instance, is suggesting that the use of a concept entails several other things. We don't have this in our view all the time. We are using language, of course.
No,
go on. Sorry.
No, but that's exactly the thing, right? Like I think that by like appealing to this idea of the amplificatory task, you're sort of like able to like reconcile, to sort of like abandon the genealogical critique in and adopt a kind of normative theory of language as being something that mediates precisely these like asymmetries that are inbuilt, and that's why I said a theory of capitalism, right? Like, because I mean, it doesn't necessarily needs to be this one, but I think that there's like really important things that mesh well together once you sort of like replace, or this is what I've been thinking about reading this and some of the other stuff that I've been working on, is that like once you replace the genealogical perspective with this sort of like normative theory of language, and which like accounts for precisely these problems in tracking the commitments and entailments, you sort of get like, you sort of better able to synchronize
oh yes, yeah, I see.
what's else, you know what I'm,
yeah, it's clear. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, just to see if I understand a bit better text from what you guys presented this far, because the idea of space of reasons is a way to talk about knowledge as a capacity to justify one's beliefs, but it's also a capacity, let's say, to unpack a statement into other coherent statements, right? So it seems like it's very strong. It's a very kind of bold position because it's tying three things together that don't usually go together. At least it's supposedly a very Hegelian idea to bring these things together, which is a sort of idea of rationality that is also social because you need to acquire, it changes with time, it changes with history, right? But even though it's social, it's not subjective or voluntaristic or conscious, it's actually kind of objective. So it's kind of like there is out there some constraints that are, let's say, like a second nature almost, and you either learn how to use them or you don't, but if you do learn, they have some rules. You're not going to come up with your own rules, right? So it does suggest a sort of objective logic, right? Objective spirit, as Hegel would put it. Something that is kind of
this
built into
control of objective spirit. Yes.
Yeah. So something like built into our institutions or practices and so on. And he makes the claim that this is useful to understand, for example, how value works, because you need to reason whether you want or not in capitalism in terms of value, competition, money. It's not a matter of, for example, the statement, I want an apple, therefore I will eat an apple. It's irrational. You didn't learn enough about reality in capitalism, because the true statement should be, I want an apple, I will work, get money, go to a grocery store, buy the apple. Like all those steps.
Yeah. But you see, this is actually where this is very subtle difference. But this is where I depart from the text. You see, because I don't think that learning that having to work to buy the apple is primarily something you are learning. It is actually something that you are coping with because of a certain constraint.
Yeah, but for example, I think it works better for capitalists than for workers, because you can say the worker resists this or doesn't think like that. But Marx says many times that capitalist rationality, the way capitalists behave, is not something of their own volition either. To be very blunt, if you want to have money, you need to spend money. There's no way to just keep the money, right? What he says, a miser, a person who stores money, hoards money, is an irrational capitalist, and a capitalist is a rational miser, right? And by rational, he means that in reality, to have money, you need to turn it into capital, which means to make money work to make more money. There is no such thing as money. There's only money becoming more money. If you just have money, it just depletes itself, right? So
go on. Sorry. Go on.
So my point is that it seems that so I'm just trying to see if I understood and if you guys agree that this is his argument, even if you disagree with it. He's then saying that there is a split at that point between the actual space of reasons in capitalism and the normative theory of what the space of reasons should be which would be the Hegelian one. And he criticizes the Pittsburgh people for not making the difference, and he gives some options. He says, either there is alienation, we're obliged to consider value, we're obliged to consider competition, but this is not rational. So the problem of knowledge is solved. We know what rationality is, but there is a stumbling block, which is actual capitalist relations. Or the theory of knowledge has not really used the Marxist additions, which makes capitalism a rational system properly, but then the problem of knowledge has not been solved. So we're alienated and we don't know how this works, or we know how knowledge works, but unfortunately we're alienated. So it seems like he criticized, the only point where he criticizes a bit the Pittsburgh school is saying that they end up having a very kind of Christian politics of, you know, put yourself in the place of the other, forgive the other, consider the other a rational agent, and things will turn out nice.
Yeah, this is the main gossip about random. It is highly justified, actually.
But is this how you guys? Did I understand the text? Okay, like.
Yeah, I can talk for me. I think yes, and I say, but I say, I don't. You mentioned something that I'm not sure it is in the Evans text, but it is more about the Brassier solution in a sense. Like, I think Evans wants just to think that capitalism amounts to a certain kind of space of reasons because there is determinacy, there is, you know, semantic holism and stuff like that, but it is an impoverished one because there is only alienation, all of that. So it is not realizing the potential of, you know, Hegelian Geist. This is the main issue, right? But when he identifies this with the space of reasons and says that it is an impoverished space of reasons, even if that might have a grain of truth to it, because of determinacy and all of that, and certain ways that this constrained behavior, I think he loses sight of something that is very important. That is something that Ray is trying to build, which is, if you don't consider capital to be a space of reasons, but to be a pattern, because Sellers has also this difference between pattern-governed behavior and rule-obeying behavior. This is quite complex, but nevertheless, the example he uses, for instance, is the bee dance, bee wiggle dance. I don't know if you are all familiar with this. I'm a big fan of this stuff. Like the bees have this multi-parameter dance that is able to indicate to the others the placement of food. And Sellers tends to think of it like a kind of pattern that is evolutionarily enforced, but not really a norm-obeying behavior, because it is not a reason-guided. And this is not just because we think that these don't reason, but because this is, oh my God, because a reason is more like an intentional, with an S, kind of property. Like it does not support substitutional versions. Like when you think, like, there's this very famous paper by Donald Davidson, Actions, Reasons, and Causes, I think, where he says, well, I turn the switch on in my house, and I alert a burglar by doing so. There's a burglar in the house, and the burglar sees that I lit the living room. So he says, well, I could say that I turned the switch on to alert the burglar. Well, this is not a reason, this is a cause. The fact that I turned the switch alerted the burglar. And different relations with different facts are satisfied. An expression of a cause is satisfied by different pairs of facts, right? I intended to light the room and I alerted the burglar. I turned the switch on and the room was lit. I lit the room and I alerted the burglar. So this is a causal relationship. They have a certain externality one toward the other. The problem with reason is that there is a kind of an internal relationship. It does not accept substitutional versions, as I was offering. Like, I didn't intend to alert a burglar. I did not know there was a burglar. I just wanted to have the light in the room. So I turned on the switch. So a reason is quite a different thing, right? So the thing is, the instantiating a pattern does not necessarily entail that you are objectifying the pattern as acting because of a reason. You can act for a reason, but I can say the reason. He uses this phrase reason, like acting for a reason, acting because of a reason. But in fact, you can map acting for a reason as acting for a cause, that is a pattern, right? And acting because of a reason as acting for a reason because it is internal to my behavior to act this way because of the reason that I have in mind, in a sense.
Okay, but how would you think the statement, I need to work for a living?
Yeah, this is the problem. I think this is acting for a reason, yes. But the thing is this capitalism, or is this the relationship between space of reasons and a certain pattern that is constraining the space of reasons that yields certain imperatives that are not only responsive to the space of reasons itself?
I see.
Like, you see the problem?
Yeah,
there's an interaction. I would suggest actually an interaction between two systems instead of one system.
But this is what now that you just said, this is what sprung to mind, because the title of this text is Capitalism as a Space of Reasons, not the Space of Reasons.
Yeah, you're right.
And actually your presentation was the. So, I mean, I don't think that he presupposes one. I even wonder if there's space for more than one. I'm not sure in the Stellarsian world.
Yeah, no, this is this is a big issue, but yeah, I don't know. I'll just say, yeah, maybe I'm not being as generous with the text as I could be, or maybe Pedro disagrees. I don't know, but I would instead of upholding the idea of an impoverished space of risk, just to summarize.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of upholding the idea of an impoverished state of space of reasons, I'd say it's like an interaction between a certain pattern, right? Even an unconscious pattern, and it's much like a hijacking, in a sense, of the space of reasons by an automatic subject that is capital, right? I would try to construe it as an interaction between, space of reasons as the means to recognize and to know things, and these constraints that are imposed upon it by capital. The difficulty is, there's a further difficulty, is that capital is not, you can't really map capital as, for instance, I intend to have light in my room, so I have to deal with a physical constraint that is to turn on the switch. So the physical constraint is there, is not part of the space of reasons, it's part of the space of reasons as long as I integrate it into my action and to have light in my living room, okay? But capital does not map nicely to this, because capital is also abstraction, right? So it's not just like an inert kind of world out there. So the thing is, and what I take Ray as trying to do, Ray Bassier, is to, instead of think of capital as an impoverished space of reasons, is to think how the abstractions that are yielded by capital come to inform and interact with this normative conception of concept use. something like that. So it's not for nothing that he's engaging with Zonretto, this kind of tradition, like the idea of real abstractions and all that. And I think this is quite interesting. I don't really have a fleshed out account of this, but I think this is where I think this is most promising, like the account of abstraction and the clash between a justificatory rational ideal of a space of reason and a certain pattern-governed behavior that nevertheless is a pattern-governed behavior that yields abstractions, and you can recognize the pattern by manipulating these abstractions in a sense, right? I would resist to call it a space of reasons though, because I think it's something in between pattern-governed activity, and this also warrants the genealogical critical side of the Marxian critique, and a full-fledged space of reasons. I would say something like this. At least this is my view. I don't know if Pedro.
Because just say my impression of this, because tell me if this makes sense. From what I know of the project, it does seem to have a bit of this, which is it's the good reason not to make capitalism into a rational project or a project that shapes reason is that in this way, reason becomes intrinsically political. Philosophy, by furthering its understanding of concept and concept use, is already anti-capitalist because the sort of Enlightenment project versus a dark, irrational system in a way, like in being very vulgar about it, right? And it seems like there is also the other side, which is, let's say, the side to avoid from this perspective, because it seems like the other side of the Brassier, the sort of new analytic approach to Marx, is the sort of accelerationist, dark Enlightenment, which says, well, if capitalism is a rational system, this is the state of reason today. We need to accept this and go through it and buy it in some way, because it's vanity to fight against this, right? So it seems like these are the two extremes when things are posed in this way. Either philosophy is something nice and good, and doing our philosophical concept work, we will go against capitalism by necessity, because capitalism is irrational and we are rational. Or if capitalism is rationality, then it's irrational to avoid it with some nostalgia.
But both are kind of problematic, right? I mean, there are these. I think these two. I wouldn't say that Brassier is on the side of the optimist. I would say the optimist is Brandon.
Okay.
Brandon has many virtues, but political acumen is not one of them. I'd say, and it is. I think it is warranted up to a point. The accusation that he's maybe it's mainly a kind of liberal politics. He's kind of naturalizing certain kinds of relationships that are bourgeois and all of that. Up to a point, I think this is warranted. And Brassier actually engaged with this and is discussing this aspect of inferentialism, because he wants to use the resources of inferentialism in a sense against these I would say this approval of basic liberal ethics, like, as you said, let's treat each other as a rational animal and this will be great and all that. This is kind of a right Hegelian solution that Brandon in a sense adopts, even though his framework might be used otherwise. So I don't think Brassier is in what you are putting up, like you're putting forward as the optimist side. I think he's in the middle somewhere, which is somewhere I put myself in a certain sense as well. The other one is like accelerationism in the right accelerationist sense is not so much about reason, right? Like if you read like Nick Land, this kind of things, it doesn't give a shit about reason really. Is much more a kind of radicalized version of anti-Oedipus and capital as this kind of automatic pilot, And he says that he's using cybernetics to justify the fact that, oh, we can't do anything about it, and it is doing to us. It is always already doing to us, and once we stop and think about it, it is always too late. This is the basic idea of right accelerations. And so I would say I'll give you 4 different versions, not 2. Like I think you're right into pointing to extremes like pro-capitalist accelerationism and maybe optimist, left liberal inferentialism, like in the Brandon figure. But I'll say there's this critical idea of, Weber is engaging with this Marxian critique and Marxian tradition in interaction with the resources of inferentialism, of Salesianism and Brandon and all that. And there's also a 4th one, which is left accelerationism, I'd say. And left accelerationism has some relationships to the Brassier view, but it's not really the same. And it has some relationship to the Nicklandian view, but it is definitely not the same as well. So left accelerationism is kind of, it's not that optimist, but in a sense, it thinks through capital, that capital is producing the means that will enables us to bootstrap it into something else. And this can be in turn be read with a different section of the resources offered by Brandonian philosophy. I don't know if you will have time today because I think this is really long now, but there is some resources, quite interesting resources there that I was going to show today. I'm not sure if we'll have the time. Pedro, do you want to add something to this?
No, I just wanted to say, in relation to what Gabriel said earlier about the sort of like maybe a space of reasons, but I think that what I found really weird about the text is that it doesn't seem to have like it seems to have certain things missing, right? Like I don't think that like this idea of like rationality like easily accounts for like unforeseen consequences. And I think that saying like either we solved knowledge, so to speak, or we don't know anything. And I think that and I think that there's something that I think it's very difficult to, I think a lot of people miss that in this sort of like Brandonian Salesian, but there's this distinct sense in which it accounts for emergent effects. And I think that I wouldn't say that like either capital is like a space of reasons or the space of reasons, but I think that like it's almost like as if like a better name for this text, it like if I was writing it, maybe it's like that like capitalism as like the negative externalities of reason, right? Like in the sense that there's like it is produced because like the collectivity of the agents that are engaged in society, like there's no real sense in which they can guide their collective, like there are ways, right? Like that's what like politics is to a certain extent, but like there aren't ways in which the collectivity of the agents can engage in goal-oriented behavior in a synchronized way. Like it's just like literally impossible. And I think that to sort of think about these as emergent effects or negative externalities or whatever is just like that saying that like, and I think that this is something that I just thought today is that like, like the what Seller says about the conflict of the images is really a conflict of scale, right? Of having the sort of like situated, and that, like now I'm bringing it more to the stuff that I work with, but it's like bringing it more to a kind of like the conflict between a situated perspective and a more like far-reaching, let's say, society perspective, right? Like, because I think that something that kind of, maybe it's very Carnapian, but I think that it makes sense with the idea of the sociology of language or language as a social practice, which is like that this structure, like societies precisely what allows knowledge to be structured in the way that it is, and therefore is actually what enables science to do what it does. And I think that like in this sort of like in the acknowledging of this, you sort of bridge a little bit the gap between like sellers really dealing with the problem of scale as it pertains to like, let's say, situated agents.
But look, what I like very much where you're heading, but I'm always worried when the critique of something kind of gives to the problem something that you would like in the solution. So what I worry is that if capitalism is better called like a sort of residue of reason or an unwanted effect, an unwanted emergent obstacle or something like this, don't we want in a theory of, positive communist organization, a way to do good things or interesting things with emergent effects we have no control over and that might be smarter than we are? Yes. I mean, I worry that what you are calling social is too close to collective in a naive sense of things we can be responsible for two reasons. Because I have the impression that one of the characteristics of real politics is that we never know who's responsible for what was thought. Who thought about the Paris Commune? Nobody did. They don't even agree about what they did. Like if you read the reports about what happened, they disagree. And then people at one point they support it and they go against it. And it's considered irrational by all interested parties looking from the outside. So it seems to also, politics seems to tap into that same estrangement experience. I know some of the authors you're mentioning are very much interested in productive uses or interesting uses of this sort of disruption of or estrangement. But I think that there is something that happens when science is the model for changing scales or for creating a picture of the world that is not our immediate, vain, or all too human picture of the world, which is that science has a lot of very specific objective commitments to others. Like to develop something new implies making it transmissible to others. To create an experiment implies, in some level, some capacity to repeat them, which are not the commitments of politics at all. Right? So in politics, you don't necessarily get the same view of what society is, where to be in reason is already to have the access to some form of sociality by necessity. Sometimes you get from society's point of view, it's totally unreasonable. And from its own rationality, it's not social at all. Like it makes sense there, it doesn't make sense everywhere, right? No wonder that it's so much disagreement over politics, as Sancier puts it, right? It's weird that the most social activity of all, it's also the one that is most conflicted. Yeah. And not only because of interests. It's not like people simply say, I want different things from you. I think you're acting unreasonably. It's like, this is totally crazy. There is no reason in what's going on, right? So, and you can't even go to the actors and say, okay, but what is the reason? And then they tell you. It's weird. So there is this, I just worry that this sort of distinction between capitalism as something which has a special, slightly rational thing, which is missing in the better version of rationality, ends up also putting in the garbage something that appears in politics, in more emancipatory politics as well, or that should appear, right? Do you guys think that we can make that distinction a bit clearer there, or is it true that this is considered a problem? Like,
I didn't get your final
no, I mean, like, am I missing some more fine distinction? Like, no, capitalism is a complex system where the emergent effects hinder something, whereas politics, these emergent effects will not hinder, or they do not hinder, right? Then I understand that perhaps the failure of the Soviet Union would be similar to capitalism's failure. Like it's a good thing turned bad, or I don't know. So like, is there a finer distinction that allows us to save interesting aspects of this negative externality and turn it into a possible, let's say, make it possible to sustain, like I would like us to maintain, that, you know, sometimes thinking is happening where we are not, and we cannot just put it back in our heads. Or no, like there is no finer distinction. This is kind of a position, and it is actually maintained, right?
No, I think there's, yeah. Well, I think my way to answer this is kind of to would be to kind of make explicit what I find kind of wanting in this picture of, you know, this big box of politics, in a sense. This is something that we've been discussing since the beginning of the Badiou reading group. One of my first notes was, how about we open the box of the truth procedure and all that. Of course, Badiou has his own account for it. But what I think this brings to the table, and of course this has to do with certain personal commitments as well that are previous philosophical commitments of stuff that I've been doing for years now, is that I do think that the Wittgensteinian picture of language use that is in a sense still present in Sellers, Brandon, all these authors, is largely correct. I do think it is. So I wouldn't want to lose that. But at the same time, there is something that is important for me, is that you don't have similarity or direct identification between the effects you have in your, you know, in a certain scale of language use of language games, and in a different scale. I think that there is no self-similarity there. There are a bunch of different effects that come about when you change scales, and this is quite interesting. So maybe you could, going back to the discussion on capital, you could maybe mobilize two different readings of capital. Either capital is the set of all individuals that are acting under capital, which is a certain way of understanding it, like you can reduce it to the individual behavior, or you can otherwise think that, okay, there is a bunch of guiding principles that make us behave in a certain way within capital, but the fact is the outcome, the collective outcome, or the bigger scale outcome is not continuous with what would one expect only from the individual behavior aspect, right? So if you understand this kind of duality of understanding of capital, you might see maybe that what we are trying to achieve with this kind of thinking is kind of to have a certain relationship between the individual, so to speak, following of certain rules or certain self-understandings, which I think are largely correct. I do think so. This is a philosophical commitment of mine that has nothing to do with capital, with politics, but I mean, in the philosophy of language itself. But at the same time, I would like to put that into the picture, because I think this is important epistemologically. This is important in a bunch of different endeavors. But you can have maybe both. You can have the non-similarity of scales and still have a certain account of motivation, intention, and all that comes with the account concerning the account of language games.
Yes, the way that I would kind of compatibilize that I think it's interesting, because it actually, though the guy doesn't like Zizek, it's exactly Zizek's idea. You know, Zizek wrote a review of, I think, Brandon's In Spirit of Trust, right? Saying that the book should be called, the Marxian version should be called In the Spirit of Distrust.
Yeah, I saw his conference on that.
Yeah, because his general point for many years, and I think that he doesn't discuss it in these terms, but I think you would agree, is that which is something you see in psychoanalysis in a very practical way as well, which is that things that determine you in a, we could call it a scale, but I don't want to overuse the term, but like that determine you from a perspective that is not your own. They cannot be seen from your perspective. So that determine you as if you were another. They're usually justified by a rational narrative about another. So the way to bring down to your level a logic that is other to you is to ascribe it to an other's logic. So for example, last time when Dennis was presenting, I think we got to a nice point that is similar to this, because if you ask anyone about their belief in money, do you know what money is? The actual justification you're gonna hear is not the theory of money. What you're gonna hear is a justification that I know that the other believes in money. That's why I can use it, even though I'm much more rational than that. I'm not constrained by my beliefs. I'm constrained by the other beliefs. So you're not trusting the other to reason like you. You're distrusting the other, but you trust that distrust. Like that's how politeness works, right? I know the other doesn't really care about my feelings. So I do what I think the other believes that my feelings are, and I say like I'm fine, though that's not real. So the interesting thing about the logic of the other's beliefs is that no one needs to directly believe something for it to work, right? So for example, there's this very famous story about, I think I mentioned this once, this very tight community, like a housing projects in some city in America. And one of the neighbors that lived there was attacked in the playground, right in the middle of the building. Like there was a playground, all the windows could see it, and this person was attacked and killed. But it was like a big struggle. They screamed. It was terrible. Then the police came the next day, and they started kind of interrogating people.
Yeah, I remember this.
Everyone heard it. Everyone heard what was happening, and everyone liked the person, and everyone liked them so much that they trusted that the other would call the police. So everyone trusted the other to call the police. Therefore, nobody called the police. Right? So they didn't act based on their belief. I like this person very much. I'm gonna help them, and they didn't believe.
They acted in accordance with their belief that someone else would do it. Like,
yeah, but that makes a total difference, because the commitments you need to have to not help somebody because somebody else will help them is not the commitment that you don't care about that person. On the contrary, it's the commitment that you care about that person and that you trust your neighbor. So it's an even more communitarian belief that for all basic principles, you would assume nobody would die out of helplessness in that community if you know people to trust each other and to like each other. But the effect was that a different dynamic appeared where everyone delegated to the other some belief that didn't coincide with anyone's belief, right? So it's not a perfect example, but it just shows that you can have rationality that doesn't belong to anyone in particular, not in the sense that it is constraining us from, like it's our hidden commitments. It's actually totally explicit. I believe the other believes that this is money and he will accept this. I know this to be fake, but if I know the other will accept it, I will accept it, right? I know that the piece of paper was forged, but if I'm 100% sure other people will accept it, there's no reason why I shouldn't accept it. So you can kind of recuperate that as a personal individual reasoning, but you're kind of obliged to mediate it by the other's reasoning, which is different from yours. And I think that that's a nice kind of intermediate step, because it seems to me that we have many examples where what you suppose the other to believe is a mediating instance to bring something that happens at a different kind of scale of society down to your own without compromising your individual rational behavior.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right, that's the structure of I know very well, but, and then you bring all these external constraints that lead to that result.
Yeah, I think there are some things should be talked about there. I mean, I see where you're coming from, but at the same time, I think it's not clear for me that what you ought to do in that situation is that you personally would have to take matters at hand. This might sound bad because I'm kind of justifying that shitty behavior, but or what was the shitty outcome of the situation. But I think this would be to understand commitments in the sense that we are proposing as something like a moral stance or like something that they ought to be right. I mean, of course, there are moral commitments, but moral commitments or ethical commitments are just one kind of commitment. And a commitment is non-monotonic in the sense that if you have further, how to say that, premises, it can change the outcome. Like something can step on certain priority, right? Another priority can come in and be given a greater priority. This is not to say that people aren't shitty, and sometimes, of course, a different set of motivations comes into the picture. But in the sense of, the understanding of the structure of language, knowledge, all of that, it is rational in a sense to suppose that somebody else would take these steps. Like the thing is, what strikes me in your story is not that there wasn't a commitment or people were unfaithful to their own commitments. I don't think they were. They maybe really thought that somebody else would take action. They were maybe lazy.
Yes. No. Look. That's not a perfect example, but that's an example that I think, from what you guys said, you would call it a negative externality. Beyond reason, there was a bad effect, but it's not like we acted irrationally because of that. And my point is that this is more fleshed out. You can say more things if you treat it as the other's rationality.
The others are okay.
Because this, I mean, in that example, sorry.
You're proposing in order to think of this as an external system, right? You're proposing to think of it as the rationality of the other built into one system, something like this.
No, but because my point is the following. Is that I don't think that particular example is very good because you're right. It's moral. It's something else, and it's very localized. But capitalism is not a bunch of weird, emergent, negative effects that are random. You can actually, the weird thing about capitalism, and Marx does this all the time in the book, he moves between capital as the thing being explained to what he calls bourgeois economy as the thing that explains, right? And he's constantly mocking bourgeois economy for saying something that they don't really believe in. But it's sort of like you're spelling out the rationality of no one in particular. There is this sort of rationality of someone that's supposed to believe in it. But even when you look at the capitalist, he's also constrained due to competition. Competition is also the capitalist thinking about how other capitalists deal with the organic composition. Not like, it's not you reasoning by yourself, right? It is you kind of adapting to someone else's reasoning, who is also reasoning in terms of someone else. And if you ask who is the reasoner, it's no one.
Yes. And
right?
let me just jump into the discussion here. What I think that Gabriel is the point that he's trying to make is that if the social conditions for knowledge are not in place, how come people again and again feel that they are producing knowledge, that they in fact know what is happening?
A because these, if you're asking about the framework we are discussing, this is not a question of believing to have knowledge. This is a structural way of explaining linguistic behavior. So,
but I think what Thiago is saying that I think it goes to the point of what I meant is that this would mean something weak if these imputations to the other were all better explained by the person who imputed, by the production of these pretend beliefs. I believe the other thinks this. Then I ask someone else who says, I also pretend to believe in this way. The fact that this other is more consistent in his rationality than our own. We are more imperfect reasoners in general.
No, but we are always already heteronymous in these.
No, okay, but this guy I'm acting in accordance to his beliefs. He's more rational than I am. Like, he's more coherent. So when I don't act, like, I know money is just a piece of paper, but the other doesn't think it's just a piece of paper. It's actually a measure of value.
But it is not a piece of paper. In a sense, like, for me, I mean, there isn't this, I mean, I don't know, maybe there is a misunderstanding or a different interpretation of what's at stake, but the thing with the space of reasons is it is built in the space of reasons the fact that the consequences of the concepts you're using are not up to you. Like, and of course, there's a dimension of it that is doing what everybody else is doing, but it's not only that. This is the subtle thing. To be rational is up to a point doing what others are doing, but the problem is there's a boundary problem there when it comes to something like capitalism or something that or an irrational totality, so to speak. And this is the problem that you can locate in critical theory, like Adorno, this kind of guys trying to make the critique of reason because of that, this kind of unwanted effects of reason, right? But never, and some of the critiques that are done toward Brandom is that you are endorsing any outcome that might come from this supposed space of reasons, okay? And yes, I admit that there is a grain of truth into that. Like I had maybe we should go back to the slide. I won't be able to show it all, but maybe just to wrap it up at some point, but maybe show this. But the thing is, the individual level, I think Evans says that in a sense, if I remember correctly. It's not like he mentions romanticism, right? Like I am right and the milieu is wrong or something like this. Within this account, this can't be so. This can't be like that. You are not right and the others are wrong. It's constitutive of your rationality, the fact that you are doing up to a point like everyone else, in a sense. So money is not just a piece of paper. It's a piece of paper materially, but
even the theory, even the conventional theory of money is also like that. Like if you are a scholar and you say, I'm aware that money is a social convention that rationally we created to facilitate economy. It's not just a piece of paper. That's still not true, because you're still sending it to someone else based on the fact that you want to hoard a piece of paper because it is infinite commodities worth. So the rationality of social agents is not what this other is that we're talking about. It's not the other of putting yourself in the place of another rational being and considering the rational community. Is a logic that is no one's in particular, no one agrees with, everyone thinks is less rational than a conventional theory of social norms, and still it works. For example, if you go up to the capitalist and say, well, the capitalist is the guy for whom this is rational. He accumulates money, he accumulates wealth. The guy is destroying the ground he's sitting on top. Like, if capitalism was an egotistical system, it would be great, because at least it would stop before destruction of the planet. So you can't even say that there is someone concrete to whom this is rational. It's an other without any particular body to, or a collection of bodies to be ascribed to. But perhaps, I mean, I don't want to diverge too much, and I'm not sure if this is kind of actually accounted for as we go, but I know you guys had more stuff to go into for more specific.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure either. I think.
But I do think just can I say something real quick? I think that there is some. I mean, like this, what Gabriel just said, like, isn't this like the sort of definition of like normative, right? Like in the sense that like the collective agency sort of like instantiates or institutes what is like the rational agent thing to do, more or less, right? Like I think that is sort of like a really good description of normativity in this context, right? Like, and I think that in a certain sense, like what I was saying earlier is like, it's not that like that this would like automatically, or that there's something to be gained in making like capitalism as a kind of as a theory of or as being like fully defined as negative externalities, but is saying that like with the thing of the ampliatory task of what Brandon says, like you can sort of like a little bit debunk this argument that Justin Evans does, that is like it's either we solved knowledge or like we didn't solve anything and we're still like, I think it's more like I don't think that it's more like, what I wanted to say is it isn't that it is fully like expressed as that, but is that like accepting this as like intrinsically connected to a theory of knowledge is precisely what allows us to in using this sort of like theoretical framework get some like traction, right? Like and then like sort of being able to negotiate with this idea of normativity. But I think that there's like two things that were mentioned briefly that I think are quite interesting, is that like, and I think it sort of like goes together with what I just said, is that like, I think in Wandering Significance, like basically Mark Wilson proves that like the semantic holism of like Brandon and Sellers is computationally untractable. And like that there's nothing like, and this is really true in like using language, right? Like there's nothing that can be dependent on everything else in a global scale, right? Like we're constantly bridging these gaps between these local contexts and what one means when it says something within a local context. And I think that being able to account for these transferences is something that I think it's like a little bit underplayed there, or sort of like maybe lacking altogether. In all of these pictures. And I think that like reconciling this aspect is super important in trying to grapple really with this question of like the constitution of normativity, or like the agency of the normative.
I think what you said it connects nicely with the idea that I was mentioning, that Seller says you can't really acquire one concept at a time, right? But also you can't acquire the whole language, because there's no such thing first, right? And because the determination of a concept does not presuppose the availability of the whole. It presupposes the availability of its vicinity, in a sense, right? Like the collateral commitments that give a concept a certain determinacy, but that doesn't mean that you can track all the commitments that a concept must have, right? And a concept here is a rule for action in this sense, right? In a sense, because either epistemic action, like using a concept, means you are endorsing some of its commitments, So it's in a kind of epistemic action, but also practical action, like using a certain concept, you believe that you ought to do so and so because of the concept, in that sense. Or it should be like that. So, okay, there's a room for disagreement there. But the point is, like, you have, I'm agreeing with Pedro in this, like, you have, like, maybe a certain horizon of determinacy wherein it is rational to use money. But you don't, for the rationality of this behavior, it's not presupposing the availability of the whole of capital relations. And this is why Marxism is interesting, in a sense, like, it is giving us a picture of the whole using certain, theoretical frameworks, there were theoretical tools for this, which might yield different norms because you are committed to a certain picture of the whole. So, of course, these new norms, have to be negotiated within the situation because the situation is localized. So I have to go in the streets, buy me some coffee. I don't have a coffee in my back room. I have to buy it. So in a sense, it is rational to negotiate with the existing order in order to have myself give myself some coffee, right? But but in the sense of, if I am committed to a certain picture of the analysis of capital, I might be endorsing also the global transformation of the productive system. And how to build a bridge between these localized rational behaviors and the rationality of the whole and of a certain whole. Of course, this doesn't have really an upper limit in that sense. But okay, let's call it a whole. Of this whole, right? This means that we must build a certain transition from here and there, from here to there, in a sense.
Yeah, but that's exactly where I think. I mean, I have the impression that there is a lot of similarities and common ground. Like, tend to be on the same page with everything that is being said. Where I think is weird has to do more, let's say, with the grammar which expresses this, because of what the grammar necessarily kind of implies as well. What do I mean? Like, perhaps this is already accounted for, I'm not sure, but the way that what seems to me, and I started thinking about this in more detail because of what Dennis presented last week with, game
theory thing.
Yeah, because
it has some overlaps here.
Yeah, and I think something Pedro also told me about his interests and so on. There is a certain way of talking about rationality, and I think that this is already the things you guys are talking about fits this very well already, which is that because reason is connected with social practice, social constraints, social construction in history and so on, it's more consistent to talk about reason as something that comes from the outside in than from the inside out. It's social first, individual later, and there's actually an additional process to discuss this individuation of reason and so on, which I think it's all very interesting. It already connects with a bunch of, it gives a sort of social dimension to a project it gives a complementary view of it. The social project of transformation is also a project of transforming reason, not because we're going to convince people otherwise, but because if you transform society, you transform reason. Those two things go together.
Yeah.
And therefore, what is interesting for society is interesting for the development of reason. We can actually orient ourselves by the fact that these two things have they're kind of isomorphic, right?
Yeah.
But the thing where I think I get stuck a bit, and for me, it seems that it has to do with the building blocks of how this gets to be expressed, which has to do with arriving at reason through reasoning, arriving at sociality through language, which are things that are very desituated. For me, it's very different to talk, for example, about media, technology, relations of production, which is what Marx is talking about. constraints that are connected with a circuit that goes from survival to consumption, to the way things are produced, the way that wealth is distributed. I feel sometimes like the specificity of what is the specific objective stuff that gets sort of entrenched with this rationality. That specificity disappears behind the theory of, well, society, you know, because society. And I think that this is exactly a very classic Marxist critique of Hegel, which is to say, yeah, dude, society, but state is not the same as economy. The logic of economy has its own logic that goes through a very different circuit than the state. And it seems to me that language today is a bit of the substitute for the state, because the state, for Hegel, had all those properties of how we learn to be reflexive. It's the normative dimension where we get entangled with norms that are outside of us, but are us in some way. And Marx is saying, look, the economical domain, it's not structured like a state. It's weirdly plastic at the same time that it's even more stringent. It bypasses your consciousness in a different way that the state does. So it is a Hegelian thread, but with some added proviso concerning that I don't see where it is coming into this picture. Like, I feel like it is more sophisticated in the theory of the state in Hegel, therefore it is a step forward. But I wonder how that specificity of what Marx did to Hegel, which is to say, dude, it's all cool, but, you know, wages, money, wealth, consumption, means of subsistence and means of production, and all those things, they're not structured like a state because they're not a matter of law. The law is actually sometimes trying to constrain this, what's going on there. Like there is a slightly different tinge to all of it. And I don't see that at the tinge to this Marxist view.
Yeah, this is why I was talking about a kind of interaction between system instead of one system or the reason of the other. Of course, maybe this pattern that is being instantiated manifests itself as the reason of the other. Like I am presupposing the rationality of the other in order to use money, but I'm actually instantiating a pattern, a causal pattern that gives rise to certain abstractions because of social practice. So of course, I'm partially agreeing here, but I'm also saying that you still need, in a sense, an account of language.
No, yeah, it doesn't. I don't think it takes any of that away. I like the way that you divide it into systems.
Yeah, you still need an account of language. So this is the thing. Like, of course, you can change subject and say, of course, the economy doesn't work like that. Okay, this is all fine if you're interested exclusively in the economy, but if you're interested in, you know, large-scale philosophical systematizing, I am one of those that still think that language is very important. I mean, this was always my point of disagreement with Badiou, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm not saying that. I like very much your solution to say, look, the discussion of the space of reasons, in that discussion, capitalist economy comes in more like a strange black box natural system, then it comes in as a sort of theory of social conventions. Because you have to construct this capitalism thing as having a causal unfolding, but a causal unfolding, the nodes of which are abstractions. Abstractions have a place in it. Yeah. So just to make
this comes about, in fact, because also we are also linguistic creatures. So language is part of the problem.
Sure.
In a sense.
No, and Marx, he will even talk about the language of commodities and things like this. Yeah, but my point is, I think there are 2 points there. One is that from what you're saying, the mix of what Pedro said and what you said, I think we should just call it a world. It's not.
I'm okay with calling a world.
Yeah, because I mean,
I'm very fond of Badiou, but I am also Goodmanian. I have at least 2 reasons to calling it a world.
Yeah, but I mean, if I'm not sure if in this approach it's okay to call something a world and then call a space of reason the sort of interactive relation with this.
I'm building something like that. Like, I mean, I don't have a ready-made answer to this. I mean, this is an ongoing project. I think you are pointing to very interesting threads.
Just to make more precise, why could it be called a world and not space of reasons? It's because, and I think this is what Dennis and I have been trying to do, the objective perspective of that you need to adopt to think capitalistically. It's not a matter of reason. It's literally a matter of sensibility. It's like in a primary phenomenological problem. Like you don't see things. Even if what you see is not rational.
Yeah, I see what you mean. But then I have my own proviso. I don't think it is just a matter of sensibility because it is a matter of seeing as. And this is part of my answer to you. It's not a matter of seeing because it's not brute sensibility. It's sensibility conceptually informed or informed by, I don't know.
And that's where I wanted to get. It seems to me that this perspective requires you to mix the two things. Like yes. To see is to be in a space of reasons.
But I agree with that. I think that is true. This
okay, and that's part of the grammar thing that I think it's complicated for me. Like I think that you can talk about having constraints that make a logical space consistent without that logical space fitting in any way into what we call rationality. I don't think that one thing entails the other. But that's one point. The second point that I think is interesting perhaps to further develop is that, you know, Zizek made a addition to Sonretto's theory of real abstraction that I think is very important because it changes it in an essential way. He divides, actually Sonretto does this, like Sonretto's text, if you go there, he talks about what he calls conversion process. The process of, he talks about the practical abstraction, and then there is a conversion of practical abstractions into ideal abstractions. Both of them are real abstractions. Like both of, even the ideal one is not personal, subjective, but they're two. And what Zizek highlights is that what, like the essential trait of social abstraction, real abstraction in capitalism, is that you cannot be the subject of that abstraction. Like it's part of the abstracting that you suppose another doing the abstraction. So it's not like you first do it yourself and then impute it onto another. Imputing to another is the process of abstracting. Like I couldn't, if I were to abstract from objects to value, value would not hold. The abstracting needs to be done in the form of others abstract value out of objects. That's why Marx begins Capital by defining value as value for others. That's the first definition of value is use value for others.
Well, of course. It seems the others are a logical component of the concept of value. You can't have value without the concept or the idea of others.
But that other is not someone who you could be. So it's not other in the rational sense of one versus the other. So I mean, we could go into this. I find it very interesting, and I actually think Zizek is very much somebody who could be in more dialogue with this tradition. He was actually very fond of analytic philosophy. He just hasn't really dealt with it in the last couple of decades. But I think that addition shows why real abstraction is in Marxism is not a problem of. It's not an argument for how everything is always already mixed with abstractions only, in the sense of, look, real abstractions, even in your daily practice is abstract, therefore the whole tradition against the given is justified. It was meant to be a more singular argument about abstractions in economic life, in the act of economic exchange, in such a way that it doesn't happen with others. For example, social contracts are not built in that way.
No.
When I create a social pact, it's imperative that I can put myself in the place of the other, right? It's actually the fact that a third party does the abstracting. Like there must be some institutional instance that guarantees the equality between both parties. That's not how it goes for monetary exchange. So that's sort of a kind of funneling where economic life becomes relevant to the way things are described. That's what I feel like it's missing a bit. And I feel like Evans exploits that, perhaps not in a generous way, but I think that's what he's hinting at. Like, you can do to this something similar as what was done to Hegel's theory of the state by Marx. And I feel, for example, things that Pedro told me about his interest in connecting this sort of interactive theory of rationality with a more kind of a clear awareness of the material medium, which allows for these interactions and for the registering of this sort of collective memory of what I want to call it, right? That material means should have some effect on how these things are then shaped, right? And I wonder how this would come about, how this would influence what we're talking about when we take in specific consideration, you know, the material means through which capitalism works, because it's specific stuff, right? It's very specific.
No, but I think that something that you said right in the beginning of this, like, okay, but like, why would language be so foundational, right? Like, there's this sort of like, I think that with Sellers and Kant and Brendan and these guys, like, there's this sort of like really like strong assumption that language is like incredibly fundamental in the structure and in the structuring, right? Like, but I think that, you know, like, for me at least, like, there's this real sense in which this can only be made sense in relation to a philosophy of technology that considers like this process of externalization, like language as technology and as a result of the material process of externalization. And I think that like trying to like bridge this gap is precisely what would allow to like really consider these questions as like, you know, like the reality of like what is the like, let's say like the technical instantiation of this as what it produces in the world, like what it actually does, right? Like, and sort of like trying to maybe track or to sort of like, well, be able to describe it would be like amazingly important. But I think that like it's not really possible without this move, right? Like at least that's my like hunch or my bet, right? Like,
yeah, because you know, like you sound to me very Engels-like in your project, because Engels did exactly this. Like he saw what Marx did to Hegel, which is to say, sure, history, reason, they're very fine, but the different mediations throughout history actually affect reason in different ways. So capitalist rationality is affected by the fact that, you know, capitalists look at machines in a way that was never looked at machines before. They look at people in a way that was never looked at before. It's not just a continuation of, you know, reason, self-learning or whatever. And then he said, okay, from this materialist perspective, where did language come from? Where did all these things that look like homogeneous social spaces come from? And he tried to do like the dialectics of nature, explain language through labor and things like this, because he wanted like to complete the worldview that is coherent with that specific point that Marx was making about economy, right?
It's almost like he's putting Marxism back into Hegelianism in a certain sense, like he's putting the building together again
from that perspective.
With the Marxian framework.
Yeah, and I mean, he was very kind of he was sometimes put down because he seemed to be more vulgar Hegelian in that sense than Marx, but it had that sort of intimate intuition that, yeah, now you can redescribe even the stuff that Hegel was talking about in terms of you know, there is an origin to the state. private property and to language and to all these things. And he was actually a sort of naturalist in a certain way, weird way, right? But I think that there is I'm not, from what I read from Brassier, I feel like he still suffers from that sort of, and I feel like the last stuff that he's doing proves this a bit. He suffers a bit from this sort of philosophocentrism in politics, where it's hard to, because I think the two things come together, like to admit that there is something specific about economy in its capacity to organize reason that is distinct from talking about sociality, also makes the players in the social scenario that are capable of intervening on that or not also unevenly distributed. To keep a theory of sociality in general is also to keep the philosopher in the game. Whereas when this game becomes uneven distributed in society, and some things are more constraining of the space of reason, whatever you want to call it, than others, then there are also better positions than others. And I feel like that's always our limits. I mean, I feel like that's my limit. I always feel like I'm tempted to recenter things in a way that I'm part of what's interesting, you know? And I think that this is a very Adornian idea as well. Like the negative critique of everything is ultimately the only thing left to do, which is kind of convenient, you know, like, okay, so you're pretty much in the center of the universe.
But I'm with you. I'm with you on that. Like, I'm not really, I'm not sure. I don't really know what Ray is doing. I mean, right now, but there was at some point this connection that I thought was very promising between the Salesian framework and the Marxian one that I wanted to see developed, but now he went to Adorno. I don't know. So the things got a little different. Maybe because of something like what you're saying. Me too. I do find there is some kind of philosophical centrism in a sense, because it seems that doing political philosophy is already doing politics or having traction or concrete traction upon political processes. And this is something that I don't agree with this. Even though, of course, the relationships between theorizing and practice are, of course, also a subject to theorizing itself and to understand how the frameworks we are offering, for instance, in this research group, will inform political practice is itself a subject of research and theorizing, of course. But I think what I think of course, I think Pedro will have his own views on this. But what I think is important to have in mind is that the account of space of reason is not exhaustive. You know, it's not like these guys are saying everything is the space of reasons. The space of reasons is that which enables us to talk about things and organize language and organize commitments and practical reasons and theoretical reasons. That's it. But at the same time, it is always responsive and interacting with stuff that is happening, that is contingent, physical systems and natural systems, and all that is still in place. So I think maybe I thought was kind of, for my reading, I don't know, the paper, Evans's paper was a bit strange that he thought that because there is a certain constraint that makes people behave in a certain way, capital must be a space of reasons. I think this is not sufficient, you know. Mm-hmm. And I think there must be stuff that are patterns, that are abstract patterns. I think Marxian framework is very interesting for that. In fact, in Zonhattel, I'm very interested in what Zonhattel does with it. But this does not mean that they are norms. They are much more like, you know, abstract patterns that, in a sense, we are compulsively instantiating. And when we are asked about what we are doing, of course, we have an ideological view of this. We will maybe reframe it otherwise. So I don't think really that there isn't space for this kind of theorizing within the philosophy of the space of reasons. Actually, I think the philosophy of the space of reasons enables certain kinds of unlocking, right, in the relationship to this kind of real. This is my view. This is what I think is fruitful. I think it enables certain kinds. It's not. Of course, it's not exactly. It's not the same as what Badiou is doing. Not exactly the same as Zizek is doing, but it enables certain kinds of unlocking of certain behaviors and certain distinctions, right, that are to be made. Of course, I'm not here giving you like a fully fleshed out account. It's much more a bunch of hypotheses, prospects for further research. But I feel that it might yield certain kinds of unlocking, right? And it's an enabling condition. It's not for me a disabling condition. Like,
would you be
about this comparison?
Yeah,
with,
sorry, Asha.
With Badiou, would you say that this space of reasons is something like, I guess, like the network of connections of real atoms in a world?
I wouldn't
right,
say
because
that.
it's already synthesized, no? And it doesn't have maybe like the ground. I'm trying to figure out what the connection between the two is, because it seems like they're linked.
This can be constructed, but I don't think this is a given.
My impression, see if this makes sense, Karan, because what you said now I think was very important. I feel like you're more inclined to say that the concept of rationality that this theory is presenting gives us tools to trust, for example, that when we move away from a sort of manifest or sort of self-centered view of the world and reconstruct the relations from the perspective of what this theory calls knowledge, even if it has the side effect of making things, for example, more strange. The world looks stranger from that perspective. Like, what? It's not intuitive to say that we know things about the world when we have this coherent logical picture, because it might not include us the way that we want it to be included. So it's kind of a sort of stressing that this point of view can be helpful to acquire a new picture of the world. It's not meant to be a theory of what's going on. It's meant to be a theory of what you can trust to learn about what's going on.
Yeah, I think both things. It is a partial theory of what's going on. It's not necessarily a complete theory of what's going on, but because I think it actually is capturing linguistic behavior in a I think a good way. I think for me, but it's not complete. And
yeah, I mean, it needs to be consistent with what actually goes on. But I mean, it's different from saying
it has for me a largely correct picture of what's going on in terms of the entwinement between language and action. Largely correct for me. Not necessarily completely correct, but largely correct. It's in the right path. And I agree with you. It is kind of untethering knowledge from immediacy, or untethering knowledge from direct contact or sensible contact and this kind of thing. So you are able to build different logical frameworks out of this. And I was going to show you, of course, we will, it's almost 10 o'clock here in Brazil. We have to wrap it up by now, but there are also accounts of how to bootstrap one ability into another. And this is quite an interesting thing. Like Brandon has this book called Between Saying and Doing, wherein he proposes what he calls pragmatically mediated semantic relations. So you have certain vocabularies, like for instance, descriptive vocabulary and let us say modal vocabularies. So one of the central theses of Sellers is that you can't have descriptive vocabulary without a modal vocabulary, because in order to describe something, you have to talk about the dispositions of the things that are being described. So you have to have modal vocabulary. So Brandon will construe this as, you have to be able to use modal vocabulary in order to use descriptive vocabulary. And then he has this very nice category theoretical graph, commutative graphs, wherein he's putting the different kinds of vocabulary and their relations that are either PP sufficiency or VP sufficiency, which means PP sufficiency is a practice that is sufficient to another practice, to engage in another practice. A VP sufficiency is a vocabulary that is sufficient to express what a practice is doing. A PV sufficiency is a practice that is sufficient in order to mobilize a new vocabulary. So
I just have an intuition now that connects with what Yasha was saying, but also opens up a very, I've never heard anyone present it in this way. I think it could be interesting that if I were to map this into Badiou's project, it's actually the theory of body, because it has to do with points. It doesn't have to do with atoms. It has to do with translating from the world into a coherent set of propositions. And what are the conditions for coherence? Right. But then there is something interesting that I think you brought today, Caron, that is not in Badiou, which is one constraint that Dennis and I have been talking about a lot, and I think that is not, Badiou is not concerned with this, which is that since for him reason is political or scientific, there is no place for social reason. So the body that needs to be internally coherent, for example, a scientific theory, it doesn't need to be coherent with the general use of rationality. It needs to be coherent as a scientific theory with its experiments and so on. Or politics, it needs to be coherent with its set of organizations, not with society at large. But between the sort of local or more constrained political body and a sort of general theory of sociality, there is economy, which is a way of combining and creating some coherence that is weaker than what Badiou strives for, the coherence of a body, right? But it's still more localized than a sort of abstract coherence, right? Yeah. And I feel like a certain way of understanding what you guys are calling space of reason, at least for me, is that it is a kind of economy of reason. It seems like reason is a kind of economic idea. Things cost, things come with commitments. Implication here doesn't seem to mean exactly I'm logically inclined by necessity to do so, to do Q because of P. But if you don't, there is a price that is already set by Q, right?
Yeah. This is the two-sided thing. Like dialectic modalities still have to do with truth and all that, but you have theontic normative modalities, and the ontic normative modality has to do with what you are inclined to do, what are you are committed to do, given that there's a truth to this and that, or we take it to be true, but also of the differences that are brought about by auxiliary hypotheses or auxiliary or lateral commitments that come into the picture, and then they might trump the original line of reasoning. They might trump it. So there is place for a certain economy of non-monotonicity in that sense. The non-monotonicity of the process it has this place of for an economy of reasons built into it, in a sense.
Because I think that's an undeveloped part of Badiou's construction that is both connected to, what you said, a sort of interactional point of view, because it is an interplay between an objective set of constraints in the world that are kind of unknowable directly, even though they are formally describable, right? Which is what he calls a world. And this sort of surjective homomorphism into a set of propositions that are now constrained by some truth value, right? And that form some internal coherence. And the resources to develop this are kind of scarce in his perspective, like doesn't go very far into it. Part of this, I think, has to do with the fact that he's happy to simply say that this is possible, but not to describe how it is possible under more specific constraints. But it's also lacking ultimately. So, for example, rather than reduce reduce the problem there to what he calls thinking, where it's a very active, very inventive, very hands-on transformation, you could add another layer to this, which is at a level of reasoning, which is not necessarily the same as such a strong sense of thinking as he has, right? Where the implication is, okay, perhaps you're not gonna come up with a new
Change the world.
change something, but you might act in accordance to a change, right? You might act in accordance as if that new proposition is real. That's a sort of weak participation that looks more like a normative theory that can still be, let's say, very much connected to a transformation, right? I mean, when you were talking about Sellers and trying to kind of describe what is rationality after Einstein, for example, after most intuitive principles about what the physical world is are gone, it is sort of like saying, okay, you might not be developing new science, but there is such a thing as the picture according to science, the current science, right? That is a sort of weak, not in the sense of depreciative sense, but in the sense of expanding to a different circle of effects that are not, let's say, the condensed effects of production of novelty, but of coherence with novelty, right? Which might yield, let's say, different costs for old actions, right?
Yeah. You might compare maybe map the two things you are talking about with, for instance, the Kuhnian picture of scientific revolution and Salesian one. Mm-hmm. While the Kuhnians, by Thomas Kuhn, right? He thinks maybe of a complete novelty or revolution or things like this, like this. And the Salesian one is, of course, it has a place for this, but there is also a historical construction wherein, posterior candidates to truth have a certain relationship to anterior ones, something like that. So in a certain sense, more Hegelian than, for instance, the Kuhnian picture, because the Kuhnian picture is all about rupture and incompossibility between scientific worlds in that sense.
Yeah, but I mean, it does seem like it could be perhaps a better way to frame what Evan seems to be aiming at is that there really is a difference between the sociality of reason and the sort of political import of reason, like of rationality. They are slightly different in that, to stay with strictly political matters and not this sort of analogy with science, but new stuff can be very localized and can have a very uneven history of kind of spread socially to the point that it's asocial. And politicizing these processes, I think, has to do with accounting very clearly for the means or the materials or the objective supports of these constraints, so that you're not assuming that this is kind of perpetuating itself because society exists. That's not something you can just leave it be, or assume as a given. That you actually need to kind of concretely describe, okay, this thing becomes a new constraint because it's supported by this process that has this power of constraining, it will have energetic costs, it will have psychic costs or whatever. You can actually start this.
Yeah, this kind of energetic cost, I think, is very interesting, and I think there is a certain area that might connect this well, which we touched upon last time. That is this linear logic thing, or logics, because you see, all we are presenting today in chapter 7 of Reznegorestani's book, he's trying to give a kind of infrastructure for this from the Girardian logic, with the Girardian logic. So it is highly, in a sense, it seems it is highly compatible.
And it is also a kind of logic that talks about costs of consuming reasons.
Yeah, but that's where I had the problem with him, because, for example, right now, Dennis and I are trying to use pretty much the same underlying mechanisms to describe this thing, which is also a symmetric monoidal category, which is resource theory that describes very nicely what a production process is like. But it's localized, like it allows you to talk about a certain ordering of consequences that can both be described in terms of costs and in terms of truth or truth values or whatever. That's but one thing is to assume that you can have the abstract general theory of that, in the sense of, again, the weird thing for me about Rez's book is that it's a social theory of reason without no actual society. Like, and I think Evans, again, he seems like it's not the best way to phrase it, but he says this explicitly. He says, what Brandon seems to suggest is that Hegel gave the picture of reason. And that's what we can use as the background to judge something. Whereas Marx is about the current picture of reason, right? And I feel like there is this like, one thing is to formally use these methods of Ludwig's and whatever linear logic to describe the current interplay between, how the costs are distributed in the world, and how this leads to a sort of interactional, emergent, rational system where you then account for this and learn how to take them into consideration and become responsible or whatever. It's a different thing to start from the other side and to say, this is how it is and how it should, this is how it's structured in general, because then you never get to arrive at that localized point of view. That's my weird impression. So that's why I think that this idea of fitting all of this into a sort of point of, like, as part of the theory of points, as we were talking, right? As part of this theory of redescriptions rather than descriptions of something. It kind of politicizes it because it explains the situated historical origin point of something, where rather than assuming that because it's historical in the abstract sense of historical, because it accounts for time, and because it's social in the abstract sense, that it accounts for interaction with others, that it already did its job. I feel like you would want to have those commitments so that you don't have certain prejudices, but you would also want to start backwards in the actual content of the theory. Like, I'm not sure if it's clear, but
no, it's not 100% clear, but this is the point.
Nothing is clear.
But this is the point of the conversation. We are making things clear. I think you're right. I think just answering to Yasha, I do think that this connects better in the Badiouian framework with the theory of bodies and the theory of points, not the atoms. And yes, it is something that has to do with fleshing out maybe the previous conditions to the procedure of surpassing of points and the constitution of bodies and something like this, in a sense.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, well, what makes it weird is that first of all, it's weird to think like an event of Wittgenstein, and on the other hand, it seems like there's no place in Badiou to ever talk about general social consequence. Like, he seems so aristocratic about that. Like, I don't care if you guys then recuperate what was done by the Paris Commune and consider it now rational. You're still not doing it, so fuck you. Like, he's like an old Marxist guy. Like, he judges us all very, very badly.
I'm not sure this is very successful and can be successfully mapped onto this distinction, but I like very much, I mean, just for the joke of it, at least, the thing that my friend Henrique Wall used to say, like, even if Wittgenstein is regarded as this aristocratic guy, his philosophy is
people's philosophy, and Deleuzean philosophy is an aristocrat's philosophy.
Yeah.
In a sense, because all the event, the novelty, and all that, and while Wittgenstein is just describing how you buy a banana in the market, or something like this, in a sense.
Yeah, but I think that this is where the hard part comes in, because I do have the impression. I mean, I hope you guys can prove me wrong and show me where this is not the case. Perhaps, let's say Patricia Reed is a slightly different example of somebody who seems to embody this interest for the methods and kind of tools of, I don't know, rational theory of rationality and social rationality theory, but also with an idea that, okay, let's not mistake ourselves that clarifying things is changing anything.
Yeah.
But usually I feel like the two things go together. Like, it's hard to find somebody where it doesn't seem like, clarifying the role and function of intelligence is in itself an intelligent development, or something like this. And that's what I think that this is why I always insist on the poor Slovene fella, that I think it is something worth thinking about. I think it's actually something Wittgenstein would also approve, which is having a clear, explicit sense of what is totally ineffective in your own practice. Like, kind of putting yourself in your own place, because it's not a humble brag, and it's not like a pessimistic position. On the contrary, usually when you ascribe problems to the right actors, they get solved. And that's cool, So,
at the same time, we'll extend this too much, but at the same time, this is something something that usually I insist also in the Badiou group, that there still are some philosophical problems. I
don't want to be radical with this.
Not to think that by solving or clarifying conceptually certain structures, you are then giving victory to the proletariat. No, this is naive, of course.
But let me just show what I mean.
Some people might act as if, I see what you mean. Some people might act as if clarifying things is, engaging in the good fight or something like this.
Yeah, but my problem is not, I don't want to kind of emphasize this too much. My point is simply that there are interesting philosophical questions that have everything to do with what you presented, that I feel like are dropped to the background when they could be in the forefront if you change that perspective. For example, the last way you described what this approach to rationality brings to the table, this sort of almost celebratory, or at least a sort of courageous commitment to non-intuitive pictures of the world. Right? I mean, one of the ways that this kind of gets a bit that presses the wrong buttons for me is that, and that's why I asked about the science thing, is that, okay, once you say this, we should be in a position to get interested in the counterintuitive pictures of the world that spring about in all sorts of practices around us that are not philosophy. Right? For example, what is a political picture of the world, right? That is not intuitive. I mean, Evans does something that I find a bit weird, because to act as if value is certain things is actually, you only get to see that behavior, not when you use money, but to show that you in the first person believe that money is part of a capitalism, is actually to engage in cooperatives, to engage, like, there's a practical behavior that goes with it that has nothing to do with a scientific description, right? And I wonder what would mean to actually start engaging with, because it would ultimately lead us to the Badiouian thesis that people think, that politics is thinking. You could translate it as saying, there is the counterintuitive picture that appears for, I don't know, high schoolers in Brazil when they're burning their schools down. That's a rational description of the world in comparison with the description that says burning buildings down is not rational. Like, that would be a way of saying, I'm not trying to think what capitalism is. It's being thought by those people out there. And that's the jump I don't see happening. Like, I see it happening in an ethical way, asking questions like, how do I compatibilize scientific worldview with the indigenous people's worldview? Like, but it's an ethical general problem where we're still in the center. We're like the people who need to acknowledge others. It's different than saying, okay, but how can these tools give more credence to processes that, from the intuitive point of view, look irrational? See my point? Like, that seems like it's something that could actually help with this, right? For me, it fits very nicely, but I think that sort of question falls to the background, and I do feel like it's
this is not present in the actual authors. This is something that to be built upon.
Yeah, I feel like it's a very interesting
sense. Yeah.
For, you know, like
this is something. I mean, this is maybe. I'm not sure I would frame them the same way you are framing, but maybe this is why of all these people that are interested in Sellers, Brandon, and all of that, I'm the one who is insisting upon a certain return to Wittgenstein because of the embeddedness of the language game and the localization and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think even if Brandon and Sellers improve a lot upon the language game picture of language, I think it's largely correct. But by doing so, I think it's as you say, in a sense, it's not like they are jettisoning the Wittgensteinian picture, but it goes to the background because now knowledge is first or science is first, and all of this epistemological theme gets the upper hand. But whereas I want to keep epistemology is something important to me, science, all of this is very important, but at the same time, there is a social practice dimension that gets, I think you express it nicely, like goes to the background in a sense, gets to the background.
Because I mean, I understand
this is part of the problem this is part of the reason that I insist, and of all these people, I'm the only one. Ray is not doing this, Rez is not doing this. All the people that are interested in Sellers are not doing this, but I am doing this. Of course, I have my previous Wittgensteinian credentials for that, but I think even if Wittgenstein himself is mainly a conservative thinker, is not really interested in change, but he has some subtle tools that can make us think within this space of reasons, within this idea of reason as and entwined with sociality, but also locality, social practice, also practice, like is a doing. To reason is a doing. Like he has certain tools that might embed this in a more effective way within a practical context, not just a reasoning context.
Yeah, I think a way of putting the challenge is that it seems like Wittgenstein is like the way you describe the Sellarsian approach. It seems like it's too, in my language, right, suture to science. Like, it requires science to always have such a strong central place, either to go along with it or to go somewhere else. Like, but it's still the model of something, and so it's perhaps extremely qualified, so that epistemology becomes the model for the issue of knowledge in general. And Wittgenstein is perhaps a bit too unqualified in the sense that it's much more quotidian, much more down to earth. But there's also no distinction, for example, between, let's say, the political use of reason and the daily, right? No. To the point that it becomes kind of pathetic to distinguish, like from his perspective, like, it's a distinction, but it's kind of an artificial one, because ultimately that's just a particularization of something I'm describing in a more general way. Yeah. But for example, I wonder, like many people are stuck with analyzing, for example, Black Lives Matter in terms of either it fits a general picture of rigorous holding of accounts of American society, and then the questions become, well, but is it rational to demand reparations? Is it rational to claim, even though it might not be historically factual, the way that they are, some militants are claiming that the effects of slavery were, or that capitalism is always racialized, like becomes a general philosophical sociological discussion if their referents are true from a scientific point of view, or it goes the other path of saying it's not about rationality, it's about identification, formation of groups, a sort of more moralistic action perspective, but the politics is lost somewhere in between, because there are some things you couldn't do, and some all of a sudden you can do. Not a matter of you're allowed to, but you can. Some statements that didn't go together, there was no implication. Now there might be. Some people that didn't meet now meet, right? To call that rationality, to call that rational behavior, it seems to me that having a list of interesting characteristics of what rationality is, or what a space of reasons is, right, is useful then to be on the side of, okay, this is thinking something, right? Because if you're not committed to it being intuitive, you're not committed to it being essentially a referentialist approach, but first of all, a coherentist approach with its own reference structure, you start gaining tools to say, look, this is building, like this is thinking something, what seems to get in the way of that sort of approach is that it won't be modeled on what we call scientific rationality, even a coherentist approach to scientific rationality. It will be built on something slightly more specific to politics, which I think is the same thing that would make the description of capitalism slightly more specific, which is, who gets to do what in concrete reality and how, like that system of constraints, because that's the system of constraints with regards to which Black Lives Matter is rational. It's a rational endeavor. It's not against the backdrop of sociality in general. And again, you see sometimes people saying, yeah, but it's nice that you guys are revolting, but ultimately, which I think is a sort of a diagnosis that we end up having to accept if we take this general background and not the sort of more situated background as the thing being redescribed by this rational set of practices. What I mean?
So, yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, it seems that maybe sometimes the inferentialist picture, well, first because it's not aimed at doing this also. So it's kind of an unjust critique. It's not really a critique, but it's just pointing out that it might play out in a very general sense. And sometimes it lacks an account of the localized instantiations or localized threads that are going on in different practices.
And I think that this is where you use the word that I think we'll have to add from this perspective. It would have to be challenged at least, which is the word instantiation, because the political view of reason is one where the social picture is the incomplete a posteriori one, and the localized one is the initial one, right? First, you have localized kind of enrichments of reason, and then you get to have a philosophical redescription of the sociality. But half of the concepts that Negarestani uses to describe the sociality were politically earned. First, but that doesn't play any role. So, I mean, I love when I sound like a vulgar Marxist because I feel like it gives me hardcore credentials, but that's, that's the thing that it doesn't change that much, because ultimately these two things should correspond somehow. This political localized description and the generalization of this somehow, but it's for me slightly different to already assume it will be an instantiation, because it kind of implies that you have the means to know beforehand what was at stake, and you might not.
I think the critique of the instantiation wording is I concede. Yeah, it's correct. I mean, but Yeah, but as I said, I'm aiming at something that is not just the, of course, the general picture, but is more localized. This is the whole issue of, you know, not just engaging with Badiou, but also engaging with Goodman and Wittgenstein, other thinkers that the people that are more only you know, locked into Sellers and Brandon and all that, they are not that interested in this kind of localization. So I think there's something to be had, to be constructed with that. I agree with you. And instantiation maybe is not a good word, but nevertheless, the thing is, if you uphold that, as I do, like language has certain importance, even in the localized forms of thinking, they are not things, you know, but things as. So this is always the issue for me. I mean, even if you are localized, there is a certain framework wherein you get to see things as they are, and there is an interaction between certain understandings and certain forms of action, and all this gets kind of reiterated within each localized situation, in a sense. Of course, it's very dangerous to just give a completely general account of this, but at the same time, I feel also that the Badiouian framework, for me, it's still wanting, because it doesn't give anything about, you know, the individual behaviors that are engaged in these practices, in a sense. Of course, it gives a lot in the way of formalizing and building local to global, but in a very, very, very different and abstract sense, right? That tries to bypass even language in that sense. So there's a kind of orthogonality between the two endeavors. They might be compatible, but you have to find a certain passageway between them and try to reconstruct both, in a sense, in order to have this more robust thing that I would like to have, more robust in my sense, of course. I'm not saying that either Brandon or Badiou are not robust, but in the sense that I'm looking for. Right.
Yeah, but I do feel like the way you both described this now, I can see it fitting very nicely as a sort of, I mean, to call it an addition is to belittle it a bit, because it's a very big thing. I mean, we discussed very often this sort of, when we were reading Logics of Worlds, this sort of weird place that Badiou tries to put his system by actually emptying it out of any concrete bearing on on any world, so that you can actually have access to a sort of view of the structure of reference, not only the structure of things that refer to others, right? So, but it's still open to that development. I mean,
yeah. I think one thing that seems to me to be the case is that the Badiouian mapping of worlds is a referential one. It's not an inferential one, for instance. I think that Heyting algebra maps the possible answers to a set of questions. So it is a possible reference points of the answers. So it's not the process of inferring like the Brandomian picture is putting forward. It's much more. If there was a philosophy of language in Badiou, it would be a much more referential kind of philosophy.
Yeah, I don't know, because I have the impression. I mean, I find this a very, very interesting topic, and I feel like there is a sort of parallel going on, because you ask a lot of questions about what would a philosophy of language look like that has some Badiouian tones to it, and Dennis and I are trying to understand what would political economy look like inside that project, and both of them touch on something similar, which is a weakening or a dilution of the stuff that he actually developed. So he has like the most rarefied theory of politics, where it only happened like 10 times during the Neolithic period. Like new political processes like the ones we described should be rare from the way that he described it, but the dilution of that and the absorption of that into social reality is a much more broad and totally untouched point. And in a certain sense, there's something similar with the relation between thinking and concepts, because thinking for him is such a rarefied invention that he doesn't take any trouble talking about the sort of classic philosophy of science themes of how are these thoughts kind of incorporated into our conceptual use, right? So it seems like that's why I suggested that something like an economy of reason that goes along with a political economy, because both things seem to require a sort of added tools to make this very strong trajectory he's concerned with connected with the stuff that is happening around it, both in the sense of individual experience, but also social institutions and things like that.
Yeah, it's a kind of the guy has this most emptied out and abstract account, so it's a kind of literally fleshing out of the process.
Yeah, but the thing that I not worry, but that I try to kind of force in that direction is that since I do feel like there is nothing that accounts for the things he's trying to account, I don't think you need to choose between one thing or the other. I think it's very much as what you said about Brandon, like he's not worried about describing these other things. It's just empty space to be filled in with compatible developments. It's not kind of preventing those things from being developed. But I do feel like when you take what he did seriously, some bad ends do seem like can be a bit reshuffled and things can be used.
You have to reshuffle things in order to compatibilize. This is a given for me. It's
but not only a matter of like I need to kind of compromise this picture to fit it with that other one. And I mean, why would I want to do this if it already looks coherent? I think that my point is that there is a problem with the coherence. Like it's a bit too coherent.
Okay.
Which I think is what Evans touches a bit on. He says it has the look of a finishing touches on something that is clearly not finished from the perspective of politics. So to compatibilize it, I think it's also to make it even more refreshing. You know, like this reshuffling is for the sake of the thing reshuffle as well, not just for the sake of binding these projects together.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
Because, for example, the Black Lives Matter thing I mentioned, in my opinion, is an interesting weakness. Like you don't get you won't be able to justify this sort of asocial outbursts that are nevertheless productive in many ways by a communitarian or kind of broadly social perspective. You have to allow for something which is very similar to what Badiou is trying to account for. So it should enrich the theory that is being reshuffled as well. I don't think it should simply be a matter of, okay, let's speak the same language, you know? But I don't know, I'm quite convinced that there is that there are means, perhaps not to do what Evans wants, especially because he forgets something very important, in my opinion, that the commitments that allow Marx to describe value the way that he does are not commitments to capitalist rationality, they're commitments to communist rationality. So it is political, it's not scientific. Like he criticizes Althusser and so on, but I feel like from what you said, because this sort of Salargian approach gives a bit too much centrality to science as the only model for how thinking separates itself from common notions, that he doesn't make that, he could have made that jump. He could have already said, you know, this works in a Salargian way, but with added commitments to politics. Therefore, this commitment should be localizable in the theory of the space of reasons, like itself. Like there is space for saying that the space of reasons is an engaged perspective, right? It's not a removed perspective. You don't need to get yourself out of the manifested image towards the scientific one, you actually get yourself through it, right? And the idea of going from the manifested to the scientific through an engagement, it sounds very compatible with Badiou as well, and with the theory of points and bodies and so on.
Yeah, there are some hints of that in aesthetics, like Brescia has some text about aesthetics that goes in that direction also, which is kind of interesting. It's not about politics, it's about art, but you know, when you mobilize sellers for the arts, you get something quite like that, because you are then forced to think about aesthetic procedures that not only are in the order of knowledge or scientific knowledge, but that force certain the inhabitual and the inhabituation, right, of your sensibilities in order to recognize something that you couldn't recognize before. Like, and of course, by doing this, you are also thematizing participation in a way that only through the model of science you won't.
Yeah, but you see, that's interesting, because that's the Adornian dead end, which is the only thing which is not scientific enlightenment is art. That's the only other model. So it's always an extrinsic model to politics. You never get the political model of anything. Like, you know, like the way you pierce through some kind of self-centered worldview, political worldview, is with politics. Like, Black Lives Matter is not an aesthetic project. It might have aesthetic components, but it's propositions.
I just pointing out when you shift for another model, it may bring
that
further
aspect,
further commitments that might change a bit the framework. This is just that, and of course, with political engagement, it will be, I think, the same as well. In that sense, not the same changes, but it will bring about these changes.
Yeah, I think that's something. I mean, that makes for me at least, an interesting parallel between, you know, theory of points, a sort of theory of rational behavior and rational acquisition of capacities and so on, you know, where they might describe the world with very different grammars, but they would at least need to be accounting for very similar kind of intermediate steps, which is, I think, you can summarize the problem I was mentioning before about the sort of centrality of philosophy in this term, because while philosophy has the upper hand, usually these commitments to arrive at the space of reasons or whatever, they are subtractive in the cheap sense of get out of an illusion, you know, of come to something that is counterintuitive, but it's kind of a matter of ultimately personal intelligence. The idea that you actually need to embed yourself in something like practically collective, you know, where the costs are given by economic costs even, right? Not going to your job in the morning to join a protest, or doing a meeting 11 in the evening in Rio, you know, it costs something like that, that this has a connection with the acquisition of some rational capacity. I think that makes it very compatible, you know, in my view. I don't know how to flesh it out, but it does seem to make a lot of edges disappear.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it. I mean, yeah, of course. Pedro, do you have something to add? Yeah, you unmuted yourself. I thought you were going to say something. No,
he's already sleeping, probably. Anyway, perhaps we should then end here with Pedro's 10 contribution.
Yeah, we had
thanks
to show, but we will send maybe the slides and have a further discussion about this another time.
Well, if you want to continue, I mean, I feel like this could definitely, you know, pick up. Perhaps, I know you guys added some other stuff. If you send us some of the Brassier literature,
maybe we could choose another text and that deals with these problems and develop this in other directions, and have another meeting like after January or something.
Yeah, I think it would be really cool.
Yeah.
Great,
and
guys.
taking into account what was discussed in this one, I think it would be interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Anyway, guys, I need to run to eat something.
Thanks. Okay,
See you guys later. Bye, Pedro.
Bye-bye. Yeah.
Bye-bye.